Wow. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Mormonism Live, and good evening to you, Mr. Bill Reel.
Radio Free Mormon, I hope you've had a great week.
I've had a great week. You sounded a bit soft there. Was it because your voice was away from the microphone for a second?
Let's see. Is that not normal?
That's much better. It's probably because you were looking over at me.
Yeah, I was looking at that direction, but not in front of my microphone. So how's that?
Very good. Very good. Hey, I'm so excited. We just had Labor Day weekend. We took Monday off from the newscast. I feel refreshed and reinvigorated from that. I understand that Mormon Stories is still going on right now, even though they started about midnight last night. It's still going on. They've got these two guys from the Stick of Joseph, and they're finding that stick being placed somewhere else by John DeLynn and Gerardo.
I just checked over there, and they're at the point where those guys are telling their story about how things were in the third grade. So there's still a long way to go before they get to like the adulthood and things that go on in Mormonism. It might run another couple of days, but it is just the normal Mormon Stories marathon episode running. So
actually, they've got some interesting things they're talking about. A lot of people are, it's controversial because, of course, these two are believing members of the church, and their business now is finding evidence to support the Book of Mormon and Mormonism. And of course, they're talking to John DeLynn, who has a little bit of expertise in that area. And so they're sharing views which are not always consonant.
There is evidence everywhere. If you want it to be evidence, it can, with a few allowances and a little bit of conjecture and some mental gymnastics, anything can be evidence that the church is true.
The human mind is a pattern making or pattern finding machine.
Yes, it is.
It finds patterns wherever it looks.
Yes, and it came to pass.
Yes, that there were patterns. So anyway, but tonight's a great night. By the way, do we have another Mormonism After Dark coming up this Friday?
This Friday, Mormonism After Dark. I think the last one was our best one yet, RFM. If folks have not seen it, what was the money line was?
I think Jacob Hansen begs to differ with you on that, Mr. Reel. It was not the best one.
It was, but the money line was.
You can't say it here because this is not. I mean, this is R-rated.
The folks, you're going to want to tune in to the Mormon Discussion YouTube channel. Check out episode 5 of Mormonism After Dark,
August 31st.
Yeah, and I hope that you enjoy it because I think they are getting incredibly well done.
They are, and I think we have low views on that, unfortunately, because we really busted out the champagne on that one. But because of its being the Friday of Labor Day weekend, I think is probably why. But this Friday we do have one going.
Yeah, I think. Well, you're sounding unsure, but I thought we talked about it. So 8 p.m. Friday, this Friday, Mormonism After Dark, episode number 6. And you guys drive the content through your live phone calls. And so we hope to see you there.
Episode 6 this Friday is at 8 o'clock Mountain Time.
8 p.m. Mountain Time, my friend. 7 o'clock Radio Free Mormon time.
Yes, episode 6. 6 is good. You like 6?
Yeah, a few more is good too.
Okay. So anyway, we've got to have on our show now a very special guest, and we want to pull him out of the green room and hope he hasn't abandoned us already. It is John Lundwall. How are you doing this evening, Dr. Lundwall?
I am doing great. Good evening, Bill. Good evening, RFM. It's great to see you.
Thank you so much. Tonight's episode is called, Could Nephi Really Build a Ship? And the reason that we're doing the subject is because our good friends over at Scripture Central released their latest in their series of How Great the Evidence, hosted by Scott Christopher. That's his name, isn't it? Scott Christopher? His stage name.
That's not his real name. No,
right.
That's his actor name.
Right.
Because
well, this isn't my real name either.
No, but you're both using different names for very different reasons.
I actually didn't know that. What's his real name? Are we allowed to say?
I don't remember what it is. It's a lot less interesting, I think, than Scott Christopher, but it is not
Kalinowski.
He's a paid actor, just FYI. So,
Scott Christopher is a leading man's name, and he does indeed sort of look like he's a comedian, but he has that stature of being a leading man, and he hosts all of these episodes. And a couple weeks ago, they released their latest, which was episode number 6. Another 6. That's 2 6s. If we get a third one, we're going to be in trouble.
Yeah.
But it's their episode 6 of How Great the Evidence, and they talk about sailing, and Nephi, though not always in the same sentence. Basically, they're trying to tackle the difficulty that the Book of Mormon presents to the world of a small group of Jews leaving Jerusalem in 600 BCE, traveling 8 years and about 600 miles to the eastern coast of Saudi Arabia, what is today Oman. It's Oman, not Yemen. Oman. And finding a place there, building a boat, and managing to sail that sucker all the way through the Indian Ocean, across the Pacific Ocean, and landing in the Americas with the technology that was had at that time. And that's what this is about. So John Lundwall, we asked him to join us, and he has reviewed this video. He's made a number of comments about the status of sailing, about the status of technology, and he's going to take us through those. After he does that, then we're going to go on to a handful of clips from the How Great the Evidence video, and we'll comment on those individually as we go. And then Bill will have some comments and slides to finish out the discussion.
Awesome.
And here's the first of Dr. Lundwall slides. Take it away, Dr. Lundwall.
All right, guys, I prepared 6 or 7 slides just from watching the video, and I'm probably going to spend the most time on the first slide because as I watched it, you know, the truth of the matter is Scott seems like a really nice guy, and there was nothing in the video that I really disagreed with. They said, could people sail the ocean before Columbus? Well, yes. Could they build boats? Yes. You know, could they navigate? Yes. So was because ancient people could do this, Nephi and his family could do it. And that's the same argument if you said, did people build the Great Pyramid? Yes. Therefore, Nephi could have built the Great Pyramid. Did people develop trigonometry and pre-calculus in the ancient world? Yes. Therefore, Nephi could have. I mean, it's the same line of thinking in this video. So I just wanted to point out on my first slide as I was watching it, look, the Book of Mormon makes, you guys have made this argument ad nauseum, I'm sure, but the Book of Mormon makes certain demands. It tells you what to look for. History makes certain demands. And when the text and history contradict, then you have an issue. And it turns out that happens all the time. It happens all the time in science. You have a model. You write all your textbooks over the model. You start collecting anomalies, and the anomalies get big enough that pretty soon history's contradicting your text, and you have to deal with it. And in science, there is a way to deal with it. You know, science is the progress of failure. You argue, you debate, you slowly wait till all the old scholars die, and then you insert the new paradigm. But there's a fail-safe in modern science that allows you for correctives. And what happens in apologetics is the Book of Mormon makes demands. You have to find silk, steel, cattle, barley, horses, chariots. And when you go and you can't find any of that, then what apologetics does is they move from the falsifiable to the non-falsifiable, right? So now we can word shift a sheep into something else, silk into something else. We can make any word mean anything else. And that takes it out of a falsifiable model to an unfalsifiable. I can neither prove nor disprove that Joseph Smith translated an ancient word from an ancient context into a new word and into a new context, which is their argument. They've gone from falsifiable to non-falsifiable. And again, I just want to point out, there are some things in religion that are unfalsifiable, as in the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Nobody can falsify or prove or disprove that. It's an act of faith. And what the Mormons do is they shift the Book of Mormon into that category. But the resurrection is a supernatural act. By itself, it's outside the bounds of scholarship, as all supernatural miracles are. The Book of Mormon is a history. You don't get to shift it into the supernatural. It is natural. So you have to argue from the historical models. And when you are constantly then moving history into the unfalsifiable, this is intellectually dishonest. So again, I'm not here to tear down people's faith. I have no interest in that. But I am, I would argue with the techniques that are being used in this show because they're deeply problematic. All right. And any comments on that?
Not for me. How about you, Bill? No. Ready to go to the next slide, Doctor?
Yeah, I just want to make the point that if you are moving your goalposts to the unfalsifiable constantly, I can dismiss the moving of the goalpost by a stationary fact. So I'm going to stick in the historical model, and you have to adjudicate to that. All right. Yeah, next slide. I'm just going to burn through these. Sure enough, they say, did people come to the Americas before Columbus? They made this whole argument of pre-Clovis, that people have been coming to the Americas for thousands, maybe tens of thousands of years. I'm not really going to get into this. It's a really interesting discussion as to how the Americas were populated. We don't have time for that, but sure enough, we had a very robust model. Clovis first, the Clovis culture about 13,500 years ago at the far end, 11,500 BCE. And this model was dogmatic in the 1970s. And by today, most scholars, most archaeologists reject it. Having said that, there's still a core of scholars who do not reject it, who stick with it. I've got several sites listed right here to the left that shows archaeological sites excavated by professional archaeologists, professional dating. And sure enough, we've got several sites that are pre-Clovis, before 11,500 BCE. One of the models for migration is a coastal model. That is, people came from the old world to the new world in boats. But please note, these are not transoceanic boats. They are canoes. They are coracles. They are little rafts, sailboats, and they're coastal hopping. They stick to the coast and they move from island to coast the way the Vikings did it when they entered into North America, Newfoundland. So, and they've been doing this for generations. So, any comments on this? We can move forward.
Can I ask you, over on the far right, it says 23,000 years ago, and it looks like it's coming from Spain by Greenland, maybe, or Iceland to North America. What is that? Yeah,
that's so this is a model. Few scholars accept it. I wouldn't hang my hand on it. That's the Solutrean model of a culture in Spain and France who supposedly sailed along the coast and entered North America on the East Coast. There's a site in Georgia where they are excavating lithics, stone tools that match supposedly the stone tools of that culture in France and Spain. This is a small group of scholars who have proposed this. Most people reject it.
Because 23,000 years ago, that's a long time.
Well, that is a long time.
Like
we've got the White Sands footprints at 21,000 BCE. We got the Bluefish Caves at 22,000 BCE. There are some old sites, and there are excellent arguments why the Clovis first people argue against those sites. So, the argument is still being had.
Okay, very good.
All right. Here are the 4 questions the show asked. Were oceans too big to cross for ancient people? And then they go and show ancient people crossing the oceans. So check that off. Again, what's that have to do with the Book of Mormon, Lehi, or Nephi? We'll get into that. I'm sure you two have much to say about that. The second question, could they actually build ocean-worthy vessels? Well, again, they show ancient people, Phoenicians, Egyptians. There were plenty of people, the sea peoples, right? That built boats that could sail the Mediterranean, that sailed around the coast of Africa.
Right.
But again, what's that have to do with the historical demands of the Book of Mormon? of this land-bound family of maybe a couple dozen people who know camels but know nothing of boats. Again, how could they have survived? Could they have lived? Again, were they capable of navigating? These are the big four questions of the episode. And they show all these ancient people of different cultures and different times. And I agree with what they're showing. But what's that have to do with the cultural, geographic, temporal context of what the Book of Mormon gives us?
Yeah, and I would throw in right there, Doctor, that when you're talking about an actual transoceanic crossing, then your food needs, your water needs are much more dire than if you're going hopping along the coast, where every place you put in, you can get more food, you can restore and restock your supplies, instead of one trip all the way across where you have to make good from the beginning to the end.
There's some problems in the narrative, because the narrative says they build one boat. Now, you could say maybe they built more, but over in Ether, they tell you they built 8 boats, right? They build one boat, which limits how many people you can put on it. And so how many people are helping build the boat? So we don't know how big the group is, but if you get more than 10 people on a double canoe raft, it gets really difficult. And how many people are on this boat, right? And then you have to feed them and provide fresh water for them. If you have 1 or 2 people, you can actually drink water out of fish. If you have 20 people, that is extraordinary. It becomes a less than a 1% probability. So there's problems with the narrative. We'll get into it.
Okay, then your last one was about navigation.
Yeah, sure enough, they talk about the Polynesians. The Polynesians sailed ocean-bearing canoes across 1,000 miles. 1,000 miles of open water, and they used the stars, they used clouds, they used birds, they used the waves. Over generations, they had trained themselves to be able to island hop over open ocean. That's extraordinary, and it shows you the sheer genius and grit and I mean, that's just, that's balls to go out on the open ocean in a canoe and to sail over 1,000 miles to another island. They had all kinds, by the way, of strategies to help them navigate, including tools that they would weave that would show them patterns in the waves and the stars, tattoos. Their tattoos often served as maps. And so very often in oral cultures, the religious people are highly tattooed because they serve as mnemonic devices, the tattoos do. And so I don't know. We never get a painting of Nephi covered head to toe in tattoos, but this is how they navigated. I guess he had a Leahona. So, maybe they've got a MacGuffin. They've got a couple MacGuffins in the text.
Yes.
and that is the cheat. But if you compare it to the demands of history, you run into problems real quick.
Well, the people they will talk about the most in this video are the Phoenicians and the Polynesians. They get the lion's share of the airtime because of their exploits and their feats, their amazing feats with navigation and sailing. The problem is that, well, first off, we're not denying that the Phoenicians were incredible sailors or that the Phoenicians did incredible things with sailing and navigating. The problem is when they take those arts, those skills, those incredibly complex abilities to build boats, to navigate them, to sail places, and to end up where they want to go, they're taking them from these cultures that have nothing to do with the Jews, and they're now taking it and using those to seek to justify the Book of Mormon narrative.
Well, right. I mean, so this is the problem of not being able to pick a location, the geography of the Book of Mormon, because if you pick the mounds, then you're taking the actual history and heritage of the mound builders away from them. If you pick Central America, you're taking the actual history and heritage of those people who occupied those supposed cities away from them. And this is what you're doing. Let me point something else out. Both the Phoenicians and Polynesians were polytheists. And their deities were also associated with their ability to travel. You had a god of the stars. And when it rose, you did your ritual and you would watch for the star to rise, and that would help you navigate. God of the sea, of the waves, right? You in these cultures, different deities provide different functions of your life ways. Now, Nephi is a monotheist through and through, which means all these different functions of navigation, shipbuilding, everything that these ancient peoples had to do has to be abstracted out into tools. You're not ritually oaring yourself across the open ocean the way the Polynesians were doing it. You've got to have a compass and a clock, and everything is reduced down to a monotheistic God where you're learning everything through, presumably, well, the text tells us an angel teaches Nephi how to build a boat, but the angel doesn't get to break the laws of physics, right. And the angel can't replace 200 years of tradition, where these other cultures have developed over multiple generations the strategies to build that boat, to build the tools to make that boat, to build the tools to help navigate that boat. And those strategies include all their polytheistic religious rituals.
And if I can say something that's rather obvious, but I think it should be said, all of these amazing sailings and voyages that the Phoenicians made, all these amazing voyages that the people in, the Polynesians made, right? All of those, behind all of those are a long series of failures.
Yes.
And shipwrecks and death and drownings. They didn't hit the water the first time and sail 2,500 miles from Hawaii to Tahiti.
All I can say is, judging from the modern Mormon prophets, the first 800 boats Nephi would have built would have sunk.
Absolutely. That's what I'm thinking. They get out of the harbor because it was one and done, right? You better hope that this is right and they got it right. They get 200 yards off of out of the harbor and they go down, and that's the end of the Book of Mormon right there.
These skills would have been learned over dozens of generations. The ability to be a shipbuilder and all the different facets of what goes into shipbuilding. It's not just taking some lumber and making a ship. Like it's the tools. We'll get into things later, but it's the rope, it's the sails, it's building the kind of ship that you can store all these things in and also survive the waves and what it brings you. You guys are pointing out all these things that the video points out as like the Phoenicians and the Polynesians, but really what it comes down to is, has a small family with no shipbuilding experience ever built a transoceanic vessel and completed the trip? And in recordable history, my guess is, as a non-expert, the answer is no.
No. Right. So there are guilds, and the guilds are the secrets of the trade. You don't share them. And part of the secrets are the tools, and it's a highly religious system. That's all part of the boat making process. This is completely skipped over in the film. And I mean, they're just talking technology. And again, if the ancient people could do it, then Nephi could do it. And it's such a specious argument that, we're going to get into some real problems. Let's hit the next slide. So look, here are just some basic tools you need to make a boat. Okay, I just listed them. You need axes and saws to cut your wood, chisels to chisel your wood, planes to flatten your wood, rulers and measures because you have to measure calipers and compasses because you have to measure arcs, because you have bows, you have bends and curves in your wood. You need drills and bits, hammers and mallets, screws, clamps, vices, smoothing blocks, files and rasps. How are you bending your big beams? You need big vices and then a way to bend the wood. And there are, there steam boxes and water tanks. They soak the wood. And then caulking tools. But you also need a wide variety of different woods. You need green woods, but also cured woods, woods that are aged and dried. You need soft woods, you need hardwoods. And in fact, the film pointed out that they used cedar, olive, cypress, and walnut in the making of that boat, because every part of the boat needs a different wood, a different aspect, and tension and its stiffness. And so you need a wide variety of woods, all used in different processes with different tools. So it's not just going out, cutting down a couple of trees and then going out and in fact, I listed one verse here, 1 Nephi 17:11. This verse is the only verse that tells us the only tools Nephi had. Right? This is it. This is the only tools mentioned in the Book of Mormon for the building of the boat. Mm-hmm. And it came to pass that I, Nephi, did make bellows wherewith to blow the fire of the skins of beasts. And after I made a bellows that I might have wherewith to blow the fire, I did smite two stones together that I might make fire.
Okay. Well, it's all downhill after that.
These are the two tools we're told Nephi has: animal skins and two rocks. That makes me believe then he has nothing else. Otherwise, they would have mentioned it, right? So, but we are given this verse because he tells us he has to make tools to make the boat. Well, here's all the tools they have to make. They have to harvest all this wood from wherever they can get it.
And the wood you're talking about is the wood just to run the furnace, right?
Right. Well, so look, actually, next slide shows us the tools they need to make tools.
I was going to say, every one of these tools takes a multi-generational skill set of idea, build upon idea, build upon idea, in order to create the tool itself to do the act of making the piece of the ship, or to put the two pieces of the ship together.
So you're saying Nephi didn't just have to build the ship. He had to build all the tools necessary in order to build the ship.
The text tells us he had to build the tools. If you're going to build all those tools in the previous slide to build the ship, then you have to build all the tools to make the tools.
And remember, they start off at Jerusalem, hop on some camels, come all the way down the coast. They can't bring all this with them. And then imagine, I was telling RFM this today, imagine them showing up and there's other people there who have some shipbuilding skills. And they go, hey, guys, can we borrow your tools? God showed me how to build a ship. That's the exact kind of story that someone tells you before they steal your tools. Like, you don't loan somebody your tools when they say that. And the time it would take to train on to make the tools or to use someone's tools, even if God shows Nephi how to build a ship, Nephi at a master craftsman level has to show the rest of his family how to carry out those processes. And so you're asking, not only is Nephi getting revelation, but that Jacob and Lehi and Laman and Lemuel and the other brother that starts with a J, they all have to become master craftsmen at shipbuilding just by Nephi playing the phone game with God and passing on the information.
And Jacob and Joseph, though they're guys and we think they would be able to help, they are no more than 8 years.
Yeah,
they're 8 years old tops. They can't be any more than 8 years old according to the text. They're just kids. They're in the way. They're not helping.
All hands on deck.
There's no Ace Hardware or Home Depot.
That's right. That's what I was saying. I said it to either Bill or to you, John, earlier today. Over the weekend or before the weekend, I was doing some little thing, putting something together, and I can't find the crescent wrench. So I go, dang. and I run to Walmart and I get a crescent wrench.
Right.
What happens to Nephi when he's over in freaking Bountiful? 600. Only took him 8 years to get there, right? So 600 miles away from Jerusalem, and he goes, "Crap! I forgot the crescent wrench."
Well, again, the guilds aren't trading or lending their tools. That is part of the heart of the craft and the religion of the guild, right? The master priest and the god of the guild protect those tools. They're not for lending. So they're not borrowing them. Are they bartering for them? They gave all their gold and silver for the brass plates. They have nothing to barter with. They're eating raw meat in the desert, right? They don't build fire in the desert. They're not collecting huge surpluses of food to trade. What are they trading with to get the tools? No, the text tells us he makes the tools.
Right. The text does not tell us about them meeting anybody.
No,
they're hiding there to borrow them from.
Yeah,
according to the text.
And in fact, the text tells us that this is a ship built like no other ship because they're not getting the skill set from anyone or anywhere. The tool, this is after the mode which God gives via revelation. And these guys, this family of Nephi, Lehi, and the siblings and all of that, the wives that come from Ishmael, they're on their own. They got to figure this stuff out.
Yeah, and if you see in this picture, Laman and Lemuel are behind Nephi. I know Nephi's kind of old in this picture, but they got axes because they're always trying to kill him. They have to build, he has to make all the tools, and the only tools Laman and Lemuel are making are axes and knives to kill Nephi with.
And what's with the bearded iguana, the orange bearded iguana?
Oh, that's a fiery salamander. I figure
came out of the fire to give him some tips.
If there's any chance for this to happen, he needs a magical element. So I put fiery salamanders in all my pictures.
Hello, Mary.
I like it. It does look like a little bit like an orange bearded iguana. We should call it Mushu.
All right. I mean, here are the tools you need to make the previous tools, and these are as impossible as the previous tools. Right. So next slide. Here is that verse you mentioned, Bill, where we are told that Nephi makes the ship not in the manner of men, but I did build it after the manner which the Lord had shown unto me. Wherefore it was not after the manner of men. 1 Nephi 18:1 and 2. And there's the fiery salamander. He's grown in the bottom right there. So what kind of ship is it? This is his get out of jail free card, where he says, okay, he's got to build all these tools, and he's got to build tools to build tools, and he's got to build all this big transoceanic ship for at least 20, 30 people. So now we're told he's building a, not after the manner of men. What is it? A hydrofoil powered by a triflux capacitor? What is it that we are supposed to believe here?
Is it 1.7 gigawatts? Is that what we're running on here?
That's right, 1.7 gigawatts. But these are the verses which are, it's the MacGuffin. Now, this is how I'm going to get out of this narrative dead end by saying Revelation produced a magical cure. So I'm just going to build a boat based off Revelation.
Right. And what is a boat supposed to look like, even one that's shown by revelation from God? Is it going to be upside down or inside out and still supposed to float?
Can't break the laws of physics. So it's going to be a boat.
Right.
It might have a really cool, masthead.
Yes.
The face of the ship. It's probably a fiery iguana.
It's the Mushu masthead.
Yes, the Mushu masthead. All right. Next slide.
By the way, you've got a UFO in that slide.
Well, right.
Did you make the slide before you saw the movie itself, which has a UFO in it.
Yeah.
The lizard people are in the background too. See that?
Yeah. No, it's dinosaurs. There's a Sasquatch somewhere in there. It's and of course, Laman and Lemuel are still building their hammers to kill Nephi. Look, he has to build a boat, and he has to build all the tools. It has to be a boat that crosses the ocean. So the UFO's in there just to show this is as believable as that UFO.
Right. And somebody said like Mormons can go, with God, all things are possible. And if we just allow God to do some, extraordinary thing, well, if God can just snap his fingers and magically make them fly through the air or float on the water, there's no reason to build a ship in the first place. The ship is needed because it's a ship sailing the ocean.
Well, the narrative would have been a little bit more consistent with history if they had pulled a Liahona and just had God make the ship appear on the coastline in the harbor overnight while they were asleep.
Yeah.
Look, I'm not here to rag on every verse of the Book of Mormon. I'm here just to point out this is the probability of this is less than 1%. And
So you're saying there's a chance?
Yeah. Well, it's the same probability as Sasquatch building the Great Pyramid. It's that probability. So yeah, there's a chance, but it's
so you're saying substantially less than 1%.
Yeah,
not just less than 1%.
Yeah, 1% seems like all of the world at this point.
Because I'll bet 1% of the Sasquatches in existence actually do know how to construct a pyramid.
So I'm told. We're also told that they have to eat and drink on this voyage, which means they have to fill their boat with pottery, with a way to store. In fact, the text tells us they take all their seeds and all their supplies and they load them on the boat. How are they doing that? These have to be placed in amphoras, in pots, in baskets, in barrels. Where are they getting this?
They have to create them. They have to make the pots as well. The containers.
They have to make that as well. So the next slide shows us all the tools you need to make pottery.
Sorry,
that's
Arthur.
right there. You don't just go out and dig dirt. You have to process some clay, grog and slip with different kinds of clay.
That sounds like a personal injury lawsuit. What is grog and slip?
Grog is little chunks of hardened clay in your clay that you make the pot with, and it makes it more sturdy. Slip is the glue that you put the handles on the pots. So different textures, different consistencies of clay in order to make these pots. It's not just one thing, right? You need buckets,
I had no idea.
Containers, strainers, spoons, mixing tools, a potter's wheel.
Now, why is a potter's wheel funny?
Well, now you're dealing with a spinning wheel and an axle. It's no more funny than the drills and chisels and forges and anvils you needed for the rest of the stuff. In any case, this also is a specialized manufacturing process that the Phoenicians had guilds doing, right? Not everyone was pot makers. There were people who made pottery, and you went to them and they had all the tools and all the rituals and all the deities necessary for them to make this. And so, again, this too has to be accounted for. And how long do you think is this going to take? They have to harvest the wood, dry the wood, several different kinds of wood. They have to make the
plant
tools,
the trees in the first place and grow them.
Yeah, that's right. Make the tools to build the boat. Again, with a Jewish family that are not seafaring people. You can move the goalposts and say, well, maybe they are seafaring people. The text doesn't tell us they're not seafaring people, but the text does tell us that they live in Jerusalem. He's very wealthy. All the apologists have said he's probably a trader, as in a merchant. That there's no indication they have any experience whatsoever in seafaring, or pottery, or timbers, right, or blacksmithing, right? You need, next slide, Bill. This is my last slide, I think. Nephi needs to be a master of shipyards, a master of forges, a master of timbers, a master of pottery. And by the way, he's writing all this down in a fully literate text. So he's a master of letters.
So he was a smart guy. Are you saying that he wasn't a smart guy?
I'm just saying that in history, this represents generations of people. And Nephi has it all down by the age of 20. I mean, how old is he?
I have no idea. It just seems very, very unlikely when you need an entire industry backed by generations of know-how and experience and trial and error and everything for every single one of these.
It looks like he's got a ton of medals from the mental gymnastics. That seems like what it would need to be for this to all work, huh?
Well, his brothers are still making knives.
Yeah.
So I would say in a nutshell, that is the case against the account in the Book of Mormon of Nephi building a ship that crosses the ocean to the Americas. I think that's put very briefly, very succinctly, very capably by you, Doctor.
Well, that is the case. So let's move on to the rest of the show.
Okay, what's up next? Is it we get to the video? I've got several clips from the video, and we don't do this one yet. We actually play this one. That's okay. We actually play this one, and these are clips from 1 to 2 minutes long.
I reset my computer, but we're still having that issue. So here it is.
Well, Scott Christopher will be on the beach in a moment, God willing.
From the early 1800s, a theory grew that the first people to populate the Americas, the Clovis people, they were called, arrived on the continent by migrating on foot over a land bridge from Siberia to Alaska about 13,000 years ago. But there's a lot of new evidence that's been discovered that indicates that other people were already in the Americas before that time, when crossing the land bridge by foot wasn't possible due to massive ice glaciers covering the area. In a 2017 publication of Science, one of the most prestigious journals in the world, researchers reported the discovery of 10 civilizations along the coast of the Americas that predate the land bridge theory. So the question becomes, how did they get there? Aliens. I'm just joking. No.
I thought
Boats. Science is now realizing that ancient boat voyages were much more common than previously believed. But where's the evidence? That is what I hope to find out.
There we go. We'll go in the clip here in a second. It's okay. So perfect. So John, why were you doing a face palm there?
Okay, so this is the one thing I did disagree about this video. The way they framed it is completely fallacious. He says that before Clovis, they have discovered at least 10 civilizations. They haven't discovered a single civilization. Civilization implies a mass population. Generally, a civilization is defined as something culture with writing. None of these people had writing. And all the pre-Clovis sites are single sites of maybe 20 people, right? This is not civilization. This is a hunter-gatherer tribe or clan. And by the way, one of the arguments the pro-Clovis first scholars make is that at the Clovis culture is tracked throughout the Americas. We can see a wide dispersion. There's population growth using the same tools and material goods. You get back into these earlier sites and we don't. Sorry about that. We see this site here 1,000 years later, and over here another site, another 1,000 years. This over. There doesn't seem to be population growth. And so the criticism is, how's this working? We've got all these disparate sites that with just really small clans, how is the population working? So this is one of the arguments against these pre-Clovis sites, and it's a good argument. But he frames it as there's 10 civilizations before Clovis, not a single one. Clovis isn't a civilization. Clovis is a hunter-gatherer culture. They're using stone and bone tools in very small family clans. He says science is just figuring out, as if science is now catching up to the Book of Mormon.
Mhm.
God damn. Now, science is the progress of failure. Apologetics is the failure of progress. We have not
Wow.
shown anything that the Book of Mormon requires us to find. And so whatever science is doing, the Book of Mormon scholars has yet to produce what is necessary. So the whole framing of that discussion was the big disagreement I had with that video.
Well, I want to add that the big agreement I had with that clip was having the flying saucer in the background, zooming in and out. And the reason why is because actually what this video is not going to tell you is that the discussion of pre-Columbian, pre-Norse, even the Vikings, that wasn't really a transoceanic voyage, right? They basically did their own version of island hopping from England
Coastal
to
hopping,
Iceland
yes.
to Canada.
Greenland, Canada. Yeah.
Greenland, yes. So it's a form of island hopping, but still, impressive nonetheless. But it's not a transoceanic voyage. And when you're talking about a transoceanic voyage, going from one place on the continent to another place on another continent across the freaking ocean, either the Atlantic or the Pacific, right? When you're talking about that pre-Columbian, you have now entered the Twilight Zone realm where Bigfoot exists, where the lost city of Atlantis exists, and where UFOs exist. And that's why I thought it was so revealing and funny, actually, that they had a UFO go by in the background, because they're tipping their hand that what they're going to be doing when they're talking about, and they will try and confuse the issue, but when they're talking to their first expert who does believe in transoceanic voyages, literally transoceanic voyages pre-Columbian, okay? Now they are in, and I can only put this as charitably as I possibly can, and I think accurately, they are dealing with a segment of science that is extremely fringe and is disputed heavily by the vast majority of scientists who do not believe it is accurate. Do I have that right, Dr. Lundwall?
Yeah. Which theory is fringe?
Pre-Columbian transoceanic.
Oh, yeah, transoceanic.
Literally transoceanic, not
yes,
island.
transoceanic. That is correct.
Mm-hmm. Which will take us to our first guest here in a second. Let me see here. What do we have next, Mr. Reel? Oh, no, we have.
Oh, no, it's this. Sorry.
Right. I did bring up the fact that even if we're taking them at face value, Scott Christopher talking about at least 10 civilizations before the Clovis, he called them civilizations. I know you've corrected that, Dr. Lundwall. But he seems to be contradicting what the Book of Mormon itself says, where it says in 2 Nephi 1, but said Lehi, notwithstanding our afflictions, we have obtained a land of promise, land which is choice, land which the Lord God hath covenanted. Yea, the Lord hath covenanted this land unto me and to my children forever, and also all those who should be led out of other countries by the hand of the Lord. But verse 8, and behold, it is wisdom that this land should be kept as yet from the knowledge of other nations. For behold, many nations would overrun the land, that there would be no place for an inheritance. The Book of Mormon presents itself as Lehi and company arriving at an uninhabited land. And yet here you've got Scott Christopher talking about not only the Clovis, but 10 civilizations before them. It seems to be anything but uninhabited. And this is thousands and even tens of thousands of years before Lehi would have arrived. Okay, so that's a minor point. Just thought I'd throw it in there for our scripture.
That's a very good point. All right. The Book of Mormon assumes they're the first peoples.
It does seem that way. I mean, that's the way it was always interpreted until we found out they weren't, and then it was interpreted differently.
Moving of the goalposts.
Yeah, so I did a screenshot of that article in Science because I wanted to really highlight this. This goes by pretty quickly in this video where they turn the page. Archaeology, Finding the First Americans is the name of the article, and then the subtitle is The First Humans to Reach the Americas Are Likely to Have Come Via a Coastal Route. You see, they're going along the coast. They're in canoes or other small ships or boats, but they're not leaving sight of land is the idea if they can at all help it. They go along the coast. So if they run into trouble, they make a left and they hit land and get out of the water as quickly as possible. And they do that all the way across. And they go down around the Pacific Rim, I think is what we'd call it, if we're talking about volcanoes, and then going down. But this is the way that shipping was done at this time period, or apparently could have been done at this time period. We know the Phoenicians did it much later on. But we're not talking about transoceanic voyages, which does appear to be what the Book of Mormon is talking about. So even though this is shown, and I think practically claimed, there's a lot of things that this video almost claims, but doesn't quite, in order to not commit the sin of actually lying. But they are talking about coastal voyages where they're trying to get you to think transoceanic voyages.
Yes, again, it's the setup. They keep making these setups and imply without ever explicitly saying. It's all implication. Because of all this, Nephi could do what the text tells us he did. But A does not equal B. And so it's a false argument.
All right. Well, here's the next clip that we have from this movie.
Can I just say that
Please.
they want you to think that that's the kind of boat that this entire family went across the ocean in. And I had to note that he was like, the land is only 600 yards over that way. I have to imagine that nobody's taking that boat right there, which looks like two canoes hooked together with a small storage area in the middle. I can't imagine you're taking that thing out into the middle of the ocean.
Well, I honestly don't know. When they talk about this at some length, and once again, this is Hawaii in the background. This is a rigger that they put together with wood from Fiji, and it's supposed to be based on the model that much earlier Polynesians used to sail between islands.
Yes.
So I think that this probably could go out on the ocean. I know that
they could go out in the open ocean. Again, they would sell 1,000 miles in open ocean in that boat.
Yeah.
Right.
This is what the Polynesians did. This is not what the Phoenicians did. Completely unlike the Phoenicians.
Right. Exactly. The Phoenicians are selling in the Mediterranean. They're selling sailing trade routes. And they're selling around the coast of Africa and around the coast of the Mediterranean. The Polynesians are sailing trade routes. They're going from island to island and trading. And they're seafaring peoples. They spend generations learning this. You mentioned earlier, what examples do we have of the Jews?
This was the pre-show. That was the pre-show. We may as well go ahead and say it right now, okay? The Jewish people are not known as a seafaring race, okay? They did really good on land. They did good with camels. They did good with trade routes. They did good with a lot of things. Sailing was not among them. The Phoenicians did the sailing, not the Jewish people. If you read the Old Testament, you'll see what the ancient Jewish attitude toward the seas was, and it was one of fear. They did not like the water. They found it extremely threatening and scary. God did not necessarily have complete control over the waters. That's where the other creature lived, the antithesis of God. And the name is escaping me right now. The god of the waters, which was a very nasty god and very tricksy, and he could turn on you in a heartbeat and sink you to the bottom of the sea. And that's why there are all of these statements in the Old Testament about the sea heaving itself beyond its bounds. They're always worried about that. There could be a second flood. Jewish people just are not known historically as a seafaring race. You've got like one account of a Jew in a boat in the Old Testament, and I think that is probably what's the guy's name?
Jonah.
Thank you, Jonah. And it wasn't on a Jewish ship, and he didn't want to be there, and it ended badly.
He ended up in the belly of a whale,
right?
Where he met Nephi and Pinocchio.
And I came up with a clip from something I found on the internet about that fact, which will be here later. But right now, why don't we go ahead and play this clip? This will be the second clip that we're dealing with. Once again, this is just the thumbnail they have for the entire show, and it's of this Polynesian ship that they are on.
Sorry, I think I sidetracked this.
Watercrafts have been available for
Oh,
thousands
hang on a
of
second here.
years or entirely capable of crossing.
Stop this guy. This is, I believe this is Professor Stephen Jett. He looks like a really nice guy. He is a real professor. He's written a really big book. But once again, he is promoting an extreme fringe theory of pre-Columbian transoceanic migration. That's okay, of pre-Columbian transoceanic migrations. And I don't mind the fact that he wants to do this, or that this is his niche and he likes it and he writes books about it and he promotes it. And I don't mind that he's on this show. My concern is that this show is presenting Dr. Stephen Jett as if he is mainstream, and as if the stuff he's talking about, transoceanic migration, is generally accepted in the scientific community, which it is most definitely not. So that's what I wanted to say before we started that clip.
Been available for thousands of years or entirely capable of crossing the oceans. Take the Polynesians, for example, who now it is clear reached South America, came all the way across from the west side of the Pacific out of Asia, crossed island by island for the most part, and ultimately got to South America. And we have Polynesian chickens in late pre-Columbian South America. We have the South American sweet potato in Polynesia.
Stop. Polynesian chickens?
Yeah.
Really?
Oh, I'm sorry. I was just pretending that I was he, saying, wait, stop. I didn't mean you to stop it, because right now Scott Christopher is enamored with this idea of Polynesian chickens.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I guess that's biological evidence.
It is. And it's definitive as far as I can.
Science can trace where they originated.
Yeah. The evidence is pretty clear pretty early.
The fact that you can make those relationships is pretty cool. I mean,
yeah, cool. That's a technical term.
I know. Yeah, that's why I used it. I knew only you would really understand.
Yes.
These knuckleheads, they don't talk on our level.
Jargon of our scientific efforts.
Okay, so he seems like a jocular, affable type of fellow, but he's just really fringe. He's very fringe. And I'm not saying French. I'm saying he's very fringe in his scientific theory that he promotes.
I haven't read his book, so I don't know how fringe. There's nothing there that, I mean, sure enough, it's been a long time since I've read about the chicken, but I believe it originates in Asia.
We're going to read about him tonight.
It migrates into Polynesia and eventually makes it to South America, but that's very late. I mean, that's right before colonial contact. So, yeah, things move, and there were people that did that, but that has nothing to do with the Book of Mormon or the Book of Mormon's claims. Again,
right. A couple of things I wanted to say about this clip raises two questions for me. Number one, Polynesians crossed the ocean to South America, island by island, he said. Okay, that's why I sort of said it after him when he was saying it, island by island. And two, chickens. This is the funny thing about Scott Christopher and his reaction to the story about the Polynesian chickens. Chickens can be identified by some process or other as having come from Polynesia to Chile, I think it was. Scott Christopher seems quite taken with this idea. What is the name of the science again that tells us where different biological forms originated? I can't remember what that is. What was that? Do you remember what that is, Dr. Lundwall? It's like 3 initials. It's like RFM, only different. What is it?
I don't know what you're asking. What is the name of the science?
It's DNA.
Oh, DNA. You're right.
DNA. And of course, the irony is so rich here that Scott Christopher is thrilled about this idea that DNA can tell us that chickens from Polynesia ended up in Chile, but the same DNA science tells us that there was never a Jew anywhere in the Americas before Columbus got here.
Yeah. The science is good when it's used to boost up your argument. The science is ignored and obfuscated, and allowances are made when the science goes against your idea.
That's the only point I was trying to make there. Sorry, it wasn't a trick question. Maybe it was. It was to Scott Christopher anyway.
You
And by
lost
the
me.
way, I looked up on Wikipedia, right, and got a few paragraphs from there about pre-Columbian transoceanic contact, and it tells us pretty much everything that we're going to hear, or some of the things we won't hear in this video. Pre-Columbian transoceanic contact theories are speculative theories which propose that visits to the Americas, interactions with the indigenous peoples of the Americas, or both, were made by people from elsewhere prior to Christopher Columbus's first voyage to the Caribbean in 1492. Studies between 2004 and 2009 suggest the possibility that the earliest human migrations to the Americas may have been made by boat from Beringia and traveled down the Pacific coast. We've already talked about that. Contemporary with and possibly predating land migrations over the Beringia land bridge. We've talked about that too, which during the glacial period joined what today are Siberia and Alaska. Whether transoceanic travel occurred during the historic period, resulting in pre-Columbian contact between the settled American peoples and voyagers from other continents, is vigorously debated. And that's a nice way of putting it and completely accurate. Vigorously debated indeed. Second slide, same subject. Scientific and scholarly responses to other claims of post-prehistory, pre-Columbian transoceanic contact have varied. Some of these claims are examined in reputable peer-reviewed sources. Many others are, like science maybe, many others are based only on circumstantial or ambiguous interpretations. I'll go slow here. This is important. This is where Dr. Jet lives and dwells and has his being. Many others are based only on circumstantial or ambiguous interpretations of archaeological evidence. The discovery of alleged out-of-place artifacts, whether they're chickens or otherwise, superficial cultural comparisons, comments in historical documents, or narrative accounts. These have been dismissed as fringe science, pseudo-archaeology, or pseudo-history. So I think that's a very fair statement of it. It seems to be pretty objectively put, but that's what we're dealing with when we're talking about people advocating for the idea of transoceanic voyages prior to Columbus. Fringe science, pseudo-archaeology, and pseudo-history. Sorry, Bill, what?
No, it's okay. When it comes to apologetics, it's not about making a good argument. You only have to make an argument. It doesn't matter whether it is the weakest argument by far. It doesn't matter if it borrows from things that have been collectively by the general scientific community as frauds or as fakes, or as that says there, fringe and pseudo-science, pseudo-history, pseudo-archaeology. You only need to have an argument. Neil Maxwell said no slam. We're not going to allow the critics any slam dunks, no slam dunks. And so we're going to contest everything, and we're going to create plausibility everywhere we can. And we're not going to deal with whether our 1,000 arguments are the weakest argument in all 1,000 places.
You know, I think that the multi-hour, though I don't know how many hours, and I don't know if it's still going on with Mormon Stories, where John DeLynn and Gerardo, before he had to leave, were talking to the two guys from Stick of Joseph. I think that's an example, a protracted example of exactly what you just described.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, it works though, Bill.
It does.
As I was saying before the show, when I was TBM, I read the shipbuilding narrative 20, 30 times, and I didn't stop to think about it once. And when I look back, that really disturbs me. It disturbs me about me. I read it, and it was just a plot point that I skipped over. And if you just stop and think it through, it turns out it is so problematic, and it turns out every page of the Book of Mormon is filled with these. And you realize, I was reading it with completely different lenses,
With faith, with belief,
yes,
with trust.
Yes. Correct.
You trusted it was telling you the true scoop, but now you look at it, and apparently, from what I'm understanding, you tell me if I'm wrong, if the Book of Mormon had included an account of a UFO going by and Bigfoot beaming down from it and having tea with Nephi while he was building this boat, it would have been equally as plausible.
Correct.
All right, let's see what the next slide brings us. Oh, we don't have to get into the Araucanian chickens, do we? The disputed evidence. Even this is disputed. And it has all the reasons that it's disputed. This fellow, Stephen Jett, will talk about a little artifact. Looks like maybe a Roman artifact found somewhere in the Americas. And once again, it's this dislocated or by itself artifact that's not connected to anything else around it. And like you said, Dr. Lundwall, I think sometimes these artifacts get blown up into being civilizations or some sort, but actually they're not connected with anything around it. And that's why a lot of times scientists look for alternative reasons for it, other than there being a Roman who made it over here, that it might have been a shipwreck that blew up on shore, or maybe somebody just planted the damn thing.
Right.
Okay, so I don't know that we're going to go into that, but it talks about some of the chicken controversy there. And there's a lot of controversy with those chickens, as it turns out. Okay, so now we get to the next clip. And by the way, can I just push the you push the pause on that?
So you mentioned.
Okay, sorry. This is going to be, I think this guy's last name is Beal, and he is an individual. They don't mention it here, but they will mention it later, that this takes place in Stratford-on-Avon, which is where this gentleman lives. And what he did was, he and company of other people, they had found, or it had been found, a wreck of a Phoenician ship dating to around 600 BC, which immediately gets Scott Christopher's saliva glands going, you can tell. And then what they did was they recreated that same ship. And what Herodotus, the ancient Greek historian, maybe the father of history, had mentioned in some of his works, a story he had heard about the Phoenicians building a ship and sailing it around the coast of Africa. Now, we don't know if that really happened. We know that Herodotus mentioned it as a story of something that happened. So what this individual does is they recreate the ship as best they can using the same wood they would have used. They use modern tools, by the way, but using the same wood that they would have used. And then he managed to sail it around Africa. They got blown way off course out into the Atlantic at one point, but fortunately they made it back. And so I think that what he proved was that the Phoenicians could have done this, as Herodotus states, but whether they actually did it, we may never know. But this is what they're talking about here, and I apologize for the lengthy introduction. I hope it'll make more sense as we play now.
The folks who built the ship with modern tools, did those folks have shipbuilding?
Oh my gosh, yes.
Yes. Again,
team.
This is a Jewish family with no tools and no shipbuilding training. So using other people throughout history who had tools, specifically modern tools, and who have shipbuilding skills is apples and oranges. If I show that a tightrope walker can walk a tightrope, that doesn't mean that Bill Reel can get up there and there's a 1 in a million chance that I can do it. I'm going to fall down and die. That's going to happen every single time. It doesn't matter that somebody else did it, who was trained and had done it for decades and had learned it from their father, who learned it from their father, who learned it from their father. And when you see what they're doing, then you go like, okay, but this still isn't an example of anything similar to a Jewish family with no training, no tools, hiking across the desert with nothing left, ending up in a place and building a ship from scratch.
And when they show some of the clips, you'll see how complicated the process is. And there's at least one flash of a chainsaw being used to cut the timbers in one of these clips. I laughed out loud when I saw it. But now if we can go ahead and play this, and we'll see where it takes us.
Since 600 BC, that's a date for our purposes that has a lot of significance. You're probably aware that as members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, we hold the Book of Mormon to be a sacred text, a historical text. But around 600 BC, a family supposedly left Jerusalem on a long journey and eventually made it to the Americas. Now, was there shipbuilding of that kind in 600 BC, the kind where you could put a ship together and take it clear across an ocean?
Yeah, absolutely. So archaeologists have found ships from that period. In fact, they've found very important ships even before that date, going right back to like 1300 BC. So, and my ship, the Phoenicia, it was based on a wreck from 600 BC. So there absolutely were ships in that period of time in 600 BC. This ship was commissioned to recreate the voyage that Herodotus says the Phoenicians made circumnavigating Africa. And that was completely coincidental to the beliefs from the Book of Mormon. So we did it independently from that. I had no idea when I started the project in 2005 that there was a parallel with the Book of Mormon. So then in 2019, we did a voyage to see whether a Phoenician ship could have crossed the Atlantic and in a way recreated the voyage that many people believe Mulek made from the Mediterranean across to the Caribbean.
So you went the other way. So you went across the Atlantic.
Yes.
And how long was that? How long did that take?
Approximately 5 weeks to sail across the Atlantic.
What kind of manpower would it have taken to build a ship like that?
It took 5 or 6 shipbuilders, but using modern tools, but they had to recreate the ship in the ancient way and using only the timbers that were available in the ancient world. It took them about 9 months to build it. Now, had you done that by hand using the sort of primitive tools they would have had available, I think it would have taken a family probably 2 or 3 years to build a ship like that.
Yeah.
I would consider that remarkably optimistic. By the way, can I just say a few things about this before we go on? Because I've got a few questions about this gentleman, which are not answered by this video. First thing is, in some of those clips where they have the sails, they've got pulleys on the sails. So I don't know if those were manufactured by Phoenicians. I don't know if it goes back that far, but they look like they had metal pulleys on the sails attached with rope in order to adjust them. Second thing is this. He acts like he's not a member of the church. He had no idea in 2005 that he was in some sense recreating this voyage in the Book of Mormon. And yet later on he says Mulek would have gone probably eastward across or westward across the Atlantic. Mulek is an exclusively Book of Mormon name. Correct me if I'm wrong. So I don't know why all of a sudden he knows about Mulek in the Book of Mormon now, when in 2005 he didn't know about Lehi, unless he joined the church in the meantime.
It does sound like he's a non-member at the front end of that conversation. By the time it's done, I'm with the assumption that he's a believer in the Book of Mormon.
What are your thoughts about that clip, Dr. Lundwall?
Well, I don't care if he's a member or not a member. Again, what did he say? 5 or 6 shipbuilders.
Yes.
9 months with modern tools.
Yes.
Translate that to 5 or 6 camel herders with no experience of shipbuilding or tools. I mean, again, 2 or 3 years, it would take you 2 or 3 years to make your tools. It'd take you 2 or 3 years to make the tools from the tools you made, 2 or 3 years to harvest the wood, dry the wood, 2 or 3 years to build a ship. It'll sink. 2 or 3 years to build your second ship. It'll sink. 2 or 3 years to build your third ship. Well, by then you've run out of family to sail.
Exactly.
So again, historically, it is radically implausible. But again, look, the Phoenicians built ships and they could sell presumably around Africa. There's no reason to doubt Herodotus's story, but he's just telling people what someone told him about the Phoenicians. So, but sure enough, they found a Phoenician wreck and it could sail in the waters. So I didn't see the metal pulleys, but I bet there are a lot of shortcuts in that ship, a lot of modern shortcuts in making that ship. And if, again, translating it to the ancient world with no experience or tools, he had animal skins and 2 rocks. That's what he started with.
Right.
it's not a matter of 2 or 3 years or 9 or 10 years. It's a matter of 2 or 3 generations.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and then 8 years to go back to Jerusalem to get the crescent wrench. Okay, so what do we have up next here, Mr. Reel? What's on stage? Is there something? Oh yeah, I said, did you catch the modern tools bit? And then at the end, we are left. The video leaves us with the impression that Nephi and his family could have built a ship in 2 to 3 years if they knew exactly what they were doing, and if they had all the modern tools, and if they had the shortcuts that you were talking about, Dr. Lundwall, and if they had access to all of these materials, as well as the traditional learning that they would have needed, generational learning and skills.
Again, I just want to point at it again. Even if Nephi receives a revelation from God where God goes, I'm going to tell you exactly how to plane this wood and how to bend it and how to make nails and how to make the sail, and Nephi has to comprehend that information in the way that he is now a master craftsman at shipbuilding. Then he has to tell all of his family in a way that without them receiving revelation, they become at least deeply experienced craftsmen themselves at these specific, unique skill sets. And there are, as John pointed out in the beginning, there are dozens, if not hundreds, of unique skill sets that go into the totality of building a ship.
here's how we know none of this happened. Because if it did happen, when they land in the Americas, they now have these tools and skill sets, and therefore they would keep using them. We should be finding these tools in the archaeology, and they should be building more boats. Their offspring would be building more boats. If they had to separate, as they separated quickly, Nephi could just build another boat. And rather than just moving 100 miles over land away from Laman and Lemuel, he could sell up the coast into a completely different territory, right? If all of this is done to get them to the Americas, then this technology would spread. It would be embedded in the cultures and archaeology of the people. And we get nothing. There's no boat tools. There's no boats. I mean, not transoceanic boats, right? There's no New World archaeology that supports this story, which is the truth of all of the Book of Mormon. So it's dead on arrival.
Well, you have to acknowledge, I think it's in Alma 63, the story about Haggoth.
Yeah, right. So what is that? 120 BCE or
Roughly.
thereabouts. I can't remember the dating. So 450 years after master shipbuilders arrive in the Americas, we finally get a story about a boat builder. Again, if they were master shipbuilders, and they have to be, by revelation from an angel, then this technology would spread. They would become a seafaring people, but they never are until the mention of Haggoth.
And he's a one-off. He never comes back, and we never hear from him again, and nobody else goes sailing by the light of the moon.
And the boat building is a one-off. It's there. Joseph Smith has to get these people from point A to point B. How's he going to do that? Well, animal skins, 2 rocks, and a revelation.
Everybody's got to start somewhere. Anyway, so let's see what the next clip is, shall we? This is more with a discussion with that same individual about different aspects that would be needed in order to do a transoceanic ocean voyage.
And you mentioned the wood. What kind of wood would have been available to them or would have been appropriate to use?
The Lebanese cedars.
Oh, right,
the
cedars of Lebanon, yeah.
So, but that would have only really been for the keel and some of the planking. They would have used olive wood for the pegs and the dowel.
Chainsaw.
And then for the mast and the boom, they would have used probably cypress fir, which was one of the most flexible timbers.
Sludge.
And then for the ribs, probably either walnut or Mediterranean oak.
And are those the materials that you used when you?
Yeah, those are exactly what we used.
So you have a real familiarity with that. Yeah.
You have a
Okay.
skill set and a familiarity with that. Like you guys have some skills. Right.
Sorry to interrupt him, but I saw the hand drill and then I saw the chainsaw. That's why I had to yell out, chainsaw. Okay, so if we can get to the next, let me see here. The next slide, Bill. I have a few comments about that. Yeah, what kinds of wood? He lists them out. They are 4 in number: cedars from Lebanon, olive wood, cypress, fir, and Mediterranean oak or walnut. And these are actually just specifications of the more general listings that you put up in a slide earlier. I know, Dr. Lundwall. The whole thing is this: if you're a Phoenician and you got a shipbuilding yard, yeah, you got easy access to all this stuff because it's right in your neighborhood. The problem is that Nephi is not in Israel. He's not on the coast. He's not by Lebanon at this point. He has gone way down into Saudi Arabia, and then he headed due east until he got to the coast of modern day Oman, and then he built the ship there. So if he used all of this lumber, all these different types of lumber, he didn't get them where he ended up. He must have taken them with him and the camels, which are not mentioned in the text either, on this trip and dragged all this lumber, all these 4 different kinds of lumber, enough to build a ship with him on their 8-year land journey, which is probably not likely. What do you think, Dr. Lundwall?
In order to accomplish this in the time frame given, he has to be trading. He can't. You're right. He's got to get this lumber there where he's at, right? Which is a land called Bountiful or something. It's got trees and bushes, but it doesn't have all that lumber, and it doesn't have all that pottery, and it doesn't have all those tools. So, right, this is he needs a Home Depot and an Ace Hardware, a chainsaw, and a UFO.
He needs all those things. Plus, he needs a small forest of trees just so he can cut them down and burn them in order to make a forge hot enough in order to produce the tools he needs to make the tools he needs to build the boat he needs.
By the way, do this without being seen because they're still on the run from Laban. Right. Up until he smote those 2 stones together to make the tools, he tells us, the Lord didn't want us to make fires in the wilderness, so we ate our meat raw. And now he's got this huge factory with large imports and exports. Yeah.
You can't just, to get the things hot enough, right? You just don't burn wood. Don't you have to like burn the wood into charcoal? And
yeah, then you make coke, which is burning charcoal without oxygen. It makes it really dense, and then that burns at a very high temperature. So again, all of that is its own technology. So
that's my point.
And doesn't it leave a lot of deposits called slag?
Yeah, right. Yeah, we should be finding again, we should be finding this throughout the Americas. This technology would be imported into the Americas. They know how to make all the tools, process all the ore right up front, 600 BCE. That would appear, boom, like a thunderclap in the archaeology of the Americas, because they would bring all that knowledge with them. And yet nothing, zero. Also nothing, zero in Oman. So we're having a real problem here.
Yeah, 3 strikes and we're out. So let's see what the next one is. The next clip here from this, and I think this is about dealing with the issue of food and water in order to not die on your way across the ocean.
But what about food, provisions, things like that?
So in terms of sustainability, one of the great sort of innovations of the Phoenicians and the people from the Eastern Mediterranean was the development of these great storage jars, the amphora, that could contain wine or olive oil or water. So you had the ability for storage. And of course, they put in these amphora like fish paste, grain as well, and could store things. And these amphora are pointed specifically to fit in the bow, in the hull of the ship. So they're very sophisticated, and therefore, if you combine that with, some rainwater and fishing on a voyage like that, I think it's entirely feasible to get across.
So the expression I heard the expert mention twice was very sophisticated. Not only is this a completely different branch of technology that Nephi and company have to master in a very sophisticated degree, and I'm talking about the pottery, which you mentioned before, but the amphora with the pointed end so they can fit in the hull of the ship to carry stuff that they're going to need. Not only are they going to need, they have the seeds that they're going to plant when they get to the new world, but they've also got to have food and water enough to survive the voyage for everybody who's on.
Sorry about that.
That's okay. It was pretty.
I was getting ready to share the link later on here of John Larson's transoceanic voyage. So
Were you really?
yeah,
It comes with rock and roll.
it does. It starts, every episode starts off that way. Anyway, that's
The other thing I noticed was in the very last part of that clip, I won't ask you to go back to it, where they're filleting the fish on the deck of the Phoenicia. Right next to it, whoever's doing that is a big 21st century stainless steel pot that they're making dinner in.
why do you think that they used modern tools, RFM? Because it would
Why?
have been too damn complicated to make ancient tools to make an ancient ship. It would have been beyond their pay grade. It
Yeah,
would
I
have
think
taken
that
so much more time.
it would have taken an awful lot more time. And obviously, the results would have been inferior, right? It would not have been as seaworthy a ship. Let me know if I'm getting anything wrong here, Doctor, because I'm just spitballing.
Well, they wouldn't have done it.
Yeah.
Look, if those 5 or 6 shipbuilders had to start by making their own tools, they'd still be working at it.
Yeah. And if they'd used the original tools instead of the chainsaw and the drills that we saw them using, they might still be working at it as well with less success.
Right.
Because if you can use modern tools to create, even recreate an old design, you're going to be able to recreate it better than if you have to use the original tools that were used to create it in the first place, I would expect.
No, this is this extremely improbable.
So you're talking about less than 1% again?
Less than 1%.
Less than 1,000%, right?
Hey, I'm pulling for him, Bill.
I know. Hey, let's give them the benefit of the doubt.
What do you think about this whole thing? You touched on it before. So let's say you got 20 people. I mean, we can count the people that are named in the Book of Mormon who have to get on the boat. There are others that are implied as present but not numbered. Those are usually female. But you've got Laman and Lemuel. They're both apparently married because they start dancing on the way across the ship when they tie up Nephi and they run into a storm. You've got Lehi, you've got Sariah, you got Jacob, you got Joseph, who are kids and won't be any help making the ship, but there's still mouths you got to feed on the way across. And you got Nephi, apparently he's married. There's Ishmael, there's other people. You got at least a dozen people named, I think. 10 to 12 people named. Let's give it 20. Or let's keep it at 12. Let's keep it at the bare minimum. We'll make it as good for the Book of Mormon as we possibly can.
It's got to be more than 12.
What's
Because it's 6 sons plus Zoram plus Lehi and Sariah plus Ishmael, his wife, and then he has sons and daughters because the sons of Lehi marry the daughters. The sons of Ishmael presumably marry the daughters of Lehi. It's probably a couple dozen people implied.
Okay. Well, that makes it better for the boat building, but it makes it harder for the voyage itself to be fed.
That's right. How are you going to feed drinking water for a couple dozen people on one boat across the ocean?
That's going to be tough, huh?
It's going to be tough.
Well, fortunately, it rains sometimes when you're on the ocean.
Yep. No, it's well, there was that episode where they were trying to kill Nephi again. I think maybe they were just hungry and they resorted to cannibalism because that does happen.
It was like the Donner Party on the Pacific.
Oh, there's a couple of historical episodes where people are stuck in a boat and they begin eating each other. So
That was actually the banned episode of The Love Boat back in the 1970s. Few people know that. Yeah, Captain Steuben got a little hungry at the bridge. So anyway,
But I mean, it's right. A couple dozen people with infants, right? There's infants. In fact, Nephi has children. Isn't there a scene where his children plead for Nephi's life on the boat?
is that his sisters? Is that his daughters of? There's a place where the daughters of Ishmael do that. I don't know that his children do.
I'll have to reread it. But yeah, it becomes extremely. Well, actually, it becomes extremely difficult from verse 1. So this is a avalanche of improbability, the failure of progress, not the progress of failure.
The worst thing that can happen is you get halfway across the Pacific Ocean and you run out of food. I mean, that's a bad situation to be in.
Which, by the way, how much supplies can you get onto a boat that size? Again, this did coastal hopping because that was also, not only was that safer for a boat of this size, it was required because you could only carry so much on this boat. So if you traveled for a week, you had to stop back off at land because you had to get new food. I mean, how much meat are you putting there? How many fruits and vegetable, like, things rot, things go bad, water gets stagnant. You have to stop at places to prevent a mass failure, and there's only so much stuff you could get onto a boat of that size.
Yeah, if that boat in the picture goes down there and you're a good swimmer, you can make it to land as long as the tigers and the hammerheads don't get you.
Well, they would argue, I assume, that they were fishing the entire time, but you take 20 people, determine the calorie count that they need for a year. Isn't the journey about a year?
I don't know that we get a specific date on that.
Is that the Jaredite journey?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So,
but the Pacific
anyway,
is a long way.
You can just calculate how many calories a day, how many fish they'd have to catch, how much water they would have to consume,
how much nylon fishing line you're going to have to use.
Right. You know,
do the fish just jump on board, or do you have to have a hook made out of metal too?
I don't have to do these calculations because I'm still back at building the tools to build the tools.
Yes.
That's not happening.
Right.
Yeah.
So it sounds like even less than a 1% chance. Okay, and then of course, what happens next? But what about crossing the Pacific Ocean? Pacific Ocean. Now, it's true that the Book of Mormon doesn't tell us which way they went, though traditionally people have interpreted it to be, including Joseph Smith, by the way, since they landed on the west coast of South America, according to one of his statements, that would have been across the Pacific Ocean as opposed to the Atlantic Ocean. The only difficulty being, if you're going from the Atlantic side, you've got to go down around Africa and the Cape of Good Hope, I think it is down there, and then make it up to where? New York, I guess you're going to land, or somewhere. But if you go across the Pacific Ocean, that's like twice as wide. I think it's 3 times as big as the Atlantic, but about twice as wide is what I've read. So it's a substantial journey across. And of course, I suppose apologists could say, well, maybe God made it all good sailing and fair weather for them, except the text of the Book of Mormon itself mentions at least one huge storm that they ran into that lasted for 3 days that drove the ship back upon the water, but did not break it up, did not destroy that ship. That was a good thing, because they untied Nephi. And then what about crossing the Pacific Ocean? So they're going to ask that question now.
Oh, this is the kind of evidence gathering I need more of. Hi there. What I mean is, well, we know that a westward journey to the New World is possible. We've talked a lot about that. Philip and his crew, many others have done it. In fact, it's highly probable that Mulek himself from the Book of Mormon went westward from the Old World to the New. But what about Lehi and Nephi and their group? They could have gone either way. If they went south from where we believe Bountiful was, depending on the direction of the winds, you know, the northeast monsoons could have driven them up past the north part of Australia, through Polynesia, and then on to the New World. So that's I am here for a reason in Hawaii, actually, is to talk to some people who know about this side of the globe and sailing and maritime activities over here. In fact, a guy by the name of Mark Ellis, I'm going to go talk to right now out on a very cool little boat. Should probably get
And this
going.
introduces, oh, here the
Another minute.
flies away. Hang on. It's okay.
Oh no, grab it. It's a rental.
The Yosepa was built in 2001 and is a 57-foot double-hulled canoe. Unlike modern ships, the Yosepa was painstakingly hand-carved and is made from dakua wood from Fiji. The Yosepa was made to be a floating classroom as part of BYU Hawaii's Hawaiian Studies program to teach ancient Polynesian navigational skills. It's been dry docked at the Polynesian Cultural Center for the past 8 years. But recently, the Yosepa was prepared to sail again as part of the 2024 Festival of Pacific Arts, which for the first time ever was being held in Hawaii. I had the unique opportunity to board this beautiful vessel and speak with its captain, Mark Ellis.
So this is the Yosepa. It's a double-hulled sailing canoe. So we have 2 hulls. It's 57 feet long and 20 feet across. It's kind of historically accurate. As far as what we believe that our ancestors from Polynesia would have used.
And I'm sorry I made that as long as it was, but I wanted to make sure, believe me, it goes on for a long time after that, where Mark the captain starts talking about the different things that you had mentioned, Dr. Lundwall, about using the stars and all I don't think he mentioned the tattoos. Of course, he's probably a good Mormon. But all the different things that the Polynesians did in order to navigate. And I know the implication they're trying to make is, well, if they did it, then what's the problem with Nephi doing it too? But once again, this is what you talked about at the top of the show, which is this is the people at Scripture Central saying, if anybody anywhere in the world could do anything like this, then Nephi could as well. That seems to be the argument. What do you think about that, Dr. Lundwall?
Yeah, that is the argument. As I was watching that, how many land masses would they have passed sailing from Oman eastward across the Pacific to the Americas? Why didn't they stop in Indonesia and just settle there? Why didn't they land in Australia? I mean, everything kills you there, but why didn't they settle?
It's not that much better in
settle there. Why is there no mention of any of that kind of voyage? Because they would be running into other land masses.
Mm-hmm.
They leave and then they show up in the Americas. Boom. Right. Even if they go the other way, I mean, if they go the other way, they're sailing around Africa and then across the Atlantic. Why aren't they stopping in Africa? What's stopping them from saying, here's the new land?
Well, I think they hit India first, and then they hit all these other. By the way, I've heard this proposed even decades ago by apologists, even though it's not mentioned in the text. Okay, it's like a blank canvas on which they can paint whatever satisfies them. But they hit all these different places, and they do all these things, and they reload. They get new provisions all the way along. In other words, they impose upon the text a story that's more reasonable than the one the text describes in order to make it match history better.
Just to show that boat, where are you putting all the supplies at? I mean, that boat has very little space other than the flat area up top. By the way, notice all the ropes. We haven't even talked about rope making and the difficulty in doing that and the tools that are required to make competent roping. And the ships that they've been showing throughout this episode have used tons of rope. And we know that rope is involved because Nephi gets tied up, meaning they have rope. And so I'll share a little bit here later on. But again, when you pick a certain culture that's not the Jewish culture on a different place of the world across the other side of the planet, and then you have these ships be constructed in a way that absolutely aren't the ships which Nephi would have used, you're still doing apples and oranges, and you're not actually showing that this was possible in the manner in which the Book of Mormon insisted occurred.
I do want to say these ships are amazing. These boats. I tip my hat to the makers and the sailors. I think it's awesome. So there's that aspect. I did enjoy watching this episode just for that. It's really
it's
amazing.
absolutely beautiful. A lot of these things. So I agree. I just don't see the connection between this and the Book of Mormon.
It's amazing what people with hundreds of years of training can do.
Yes, it is.
You would
So
probably need a mile of cordage.
A mile of cordage, and every one of those, excuse me, let me see here. Every one of those. No, I'm sorry. Was it here? No.
Well, no.
It was at the end of that slide.
Yeah.
It was at the end of that slide. Every single one of those cords also, I believe, has a pulley system, because there has to be in order to keep these cords absolutely taut, which they have to be, and they have to be continually adjusted to maintain that.
That's a great point. The water will change the boat in ways that you can't even anticipate. So you have to have a skill set that along the way on the trip, you can adapt the boat as the wood swells and shrinks, as the rope tightens and loosens. And these are also things that require a decade at least of being on ships and being trained by people who have dealt with the waters and dealt with these situations to know what it is you need to do.
Dr. Lundwall is nodding in assent and shaking his head. Okay. So let's go to the next slide where I had said, question, is the practice of South Pacific Islanders sailing from island to island commensurate with Lehi's family sailing from Arabia to the Americas? I think we probably already answered that question. So we'll go on to the next slide. Now, this is what it strikes me as I've contemplated and pondered even upon this video. The methodology of the Scripture Central video here seems to be the following. Number one, collect any accounts of ancient sailing, regardless of the people doing it, or where, or when, and lumping it all together as if it is evidence of the Book of Mormon. And the second thing that I wanted to note here, which we touched on now, because you brought it up earlier, Dr. Lundwall, note that nowhere in the entire video do they have any examples of Jewish seafarers. This is because anciently Jewish peoples were scared of the waters. Just read the Old Testament. And I found this little snippet on the internet to illustrate that point. The Sea of Galilee is beautiful, but its calm, peaceful setting does not present a complete picture of ancient people's feelings toward it. Many biblical images related to the sea had very negative connotations. Jews were not seafarers. They were desert nomads. They rarely controlled the seacoast. Their father Abraham was a shepherd in the Negev. The Israelites wandered in the desert for 40 years before settling in the Promised Land. And even great King David spent his childhood caring for sheep in the wilderness around Bethlehem. To the Israelites, the sea probably appeared alien and threatening. They were not at home there. And ancient cultural stories depicted the sea as a monstrous beast and a place where Baal would battle with Yam. That's the sea god. Yam's the sea god. Baal's the storm god, I think. But would battle with Yam, the sea god. Right. Okay. So it makes it even more difficult, historically speaking, to have a Jewish group of all people, building a ship and then sailing across the ocean of all things, because they were not a seafaring people. These are like the last people I think you could come up with. These would be a group of people who would be the least likely to have generations of shipbuilding experience.
By the way,
is that fair to say, Dr. Lundwall?
No, their methodology, which I addressed up front and you just reiterated, collect any example from anywhere, anytime, any context, and use that as proof for the Book of Mormon. They repeatedly do this. The gold plates is as probable as the sea journey. And what do? They collect any example of any writing on any plates anywhere around the world to prove that it's possible. Again, it's less than 1% probable. They repeatedly do this with horses and chariots and swords and plates and boats. And yet, so far, the methodology has worked, Bill.
Yeah.
What do you do?
Well, let's go through. Go ahead, Bill.
No, RFM. She's at Moksha Raver. Is that saying?
Moksha. My
What
penguin
about
friend.
Yeah, what about Arabian Peninsula shipbuilders helping them? Could they have hired some Greek sailors? Two problems. One is that, as John pointed out, they've given up all of their wealth. It's gone. They left everything back in Jerusalem, used what they could to try to purchase the brass plates. That's problem one. They don't have any money to hire them. Okay, well, let's just say there's some shipbuilders who, out of the generosity of their heart, they want to help. Problem is, God showed Nephi a way to build a ship that is not like any other ship. So
Well,
what do
that's
you
right.
do when you hire shipbuilders who know how to build a certain kind of ship, and you say, no, we want you to build this other kind of ship that you don't know anything about? Well, they're going to be worse off than people who don't know how to build a ship, because you have to retrain them to do things differently than the way that they've been trained to do things at an expert level. And that is a cluster F if I've ever seen one.
By the way, Bill, I will just remark that me and Moksha go way back, and Moksha is known for making tongue-in-cheek comments.
Yeah,
So
I
it's
still think
quite
it's
possible that
important.
Moksha
Yeah.
was speaking that way in that comment, though I
I'm
can't.
sure. I know she's participated in the show before, so I'm sure that's the case, but I think it's a valid question that when you actually examine what the Book of Mormon says, the question makes the reasonable answer without the Book of Mormon text, makes it an unreasonable answer.
Right. If we can create any possible scenario, even if it contradicts what the Book of Mormon says, then, I mean, I think we're in conspiracy land, actually.
Yeah, we already are, but go ahead.
I think that's how conspiracies thrive and are created.
Yeah.
So the next thing here, the best example, and I'm closing out with the clips. This is the last clip. The best example from the Scripture Central video of taking something completely out of time and place as evidence for the Book of Mormon has to do with a modern day French voyager. So that's 2,600 years. Okay. Difference. This is modern day. That's 600 years BC in the Book of Mormon. With a modern day French voyager using modern day technology to make the equivalent of a giant beach balloon to be blown across the sea, ... And then liken it to the Jaredites who would have sailed 3,500 years ago. I'm sorry, we're talking about the Jaredites, not the Nephites on this one. It's even longer ago. And then liken it to the Jaredites who would have sailed 3,500 years ago with no modern day technology, and they weren't even French. So let's check this out. And honestly, they just throw this in there. Notice that they're not making any claims. Okay, this is the classic. Instead of pointing at something and making a claim in an argument, they are suggesting things without actually making the argument and allowing the hearer to make the conclusion they want them to make without having to make the claim themselves.
We found a guy by the name of Jean-Jacques Savine. He didn't use an ancient replica, but he built a 10-foot-long barrel boat with no steering mechanisms whatsoever, launched himself into the Atlantic and crossed the Atlantic in 127 days. Now, I don't know about you, but little barges that are tight like unto a dish comes to mind. Little Jaredite vibe, if you will.
And he also lit it with a couple of glowing rocks so that he could see by night to feed all the oxen and the cows and all the animals that he had brought us with him as well.
And there was a window above and below, right? So
There was. Absolutely. So we're taking 21st century technology with some Frenchie, and now we're going to say, hey, if he could do it, what's wrong with the Jaredites doing it?
You know what? At this point in the film, I'm actually pulling for him. I'm like, all right, come on, guys. I'm rooting for you. Show up with something.
Give me something. Give me anything. So is that fair to say that I know you're rooting for him, and I appreciate that. They appreciate that. But does that mean that you haven't seen anything yet that you find at all persuasive?
No, I'm still back at the animal skins and the two rocks. They wouldn't have got past that point.
Well, what
You
is that
said
Frenchie made
MacGuffin.
that? I'm sorry,
It's more
what?
like, you said MacGuffin. It's more like MacGyver, right? You got to take a Leahona and two rocks, and you gotta make the thing out of it that no one expects that you can do.
Yeah, and I sometimes get that word MacGuffin wrong, but I think, correct me again if I'm wrong, isn't a MacGuffin sort of a plot element, usually in a movie, that moves the plot along, but if you were to stop and look at it, It doesn't make any sense, really.
That's what I thought it was.
That's what I think
The
it is. A
whole
MacGuffin in a
boat
movie.
building pericope is a MacGuffin. It's just a plot device to get everything over into the Americas.
Yeah, and the famous MacGuffin is the letters of transit in Casablanca. The entire plot depends upon the letters of transit and the couriers being killed and the letters of transit stolen, right? Signed by Charles de Gaulle himself. They cannot be rescinded. And you go, okay. But when you stop and you look at it, you go, what sense does that make that there would be these letters of transit signed by Charles de Gaulle that cannot be rescinded? Yeah, that doesn't make any sense. But we accept it in order to get into the plot and move it along. So I think that that's a great example, a great word used for this boat building affair of Nephi, which is it is a MacGuffin in the Book of Mormon. So let's see here. Oh, I'm sorry. Did you put something up on the screen there, Bill? I was busy.
Just that I had copied and pasted the definition of MacGuffin earlier in the show. By the way, I wasn't saying MacGyver and MacGuffin are the same thing.
Oh,
MacGuffin
I know.
is what you guys said it was. MacGyver is a TV show where a guy took matchsticks and a handkerchief and he built bombs to blow up walls and stuff. So,
I knew that you were talking. I thought that was very funny. I just all of a sudden I thought there might be some people watching.
Yeah,
who don't know what a MacGuffin is, and apparently it doesn't have. And I always get this part wrong. It doesn't have to be impossible or implausible. It just has to be insignificant, unimportant, or irrelevant in itself. But sometimes it's impossible or implausible anyway. Like,
and it's really in Mormonism, it's more like MacGruber, which was the Saturday Night Live version of MacGyver, which was even more odd than what MacGyver was trying to do. So anyway, we can move on. MacGruber.
So I think that let me see here. Oh yeah, I did put up here segments of the video that we don't cover. Believe it or not, we're not covering everything in the video, but I did, for purposes of completeness, want to share with you what we're not covering. Number one, we're not covering the spiritual experiences of Boyd Tuttle, an LDS sailor on a replica craft, the Phoenicia. Two, we're not covering their brief discussion about Tor Heyerdahl and the Kon-Tiki, where there's an extended conversation with a Hawaiian sailor / scholar on Hawaiian voyages. That was the Captain Mark. To Tahiti and other South Pacific islands. And finally, we're not covering a very extended, at least like 10 minutes. It seems that long. An extended conversation discussion at the end of the video of a conversion experience of a young man working at the Polynesian Cultural Center.
We're also not going to cover Ensign Blair's magical sailing trip either, which can be found in Radio Free Mormon, A Whale of a Tale, Part 1 and Part 2.
You got the name. Did you look that up? Ensign Blair?
Ensign Blair. Yeah.
Right up there with Ensign Pulver.
The reason I say that is because talking about the spiritual experience of an LDS sailor doesn't mean shit when you understand that other LDS sailors make up stories and they can't be trusted. So anyway.
The best part about that whole thing was when you actually emailed the general authority who told that story in general conference and started calling him out.
And he replied. He sent me an email back.
I know. And you sent him another email. I expect that your email was the last email that went unreplied to in that exchange.
It was.
Okay. Just a guess there. And now, I'm sorry. Now there's your slides, Bill.
Yep. Sweet. Let me put this up on the screen. We've talked about a lot of things tonight. I'm going to just zip through these super fast. So mining and working iron, we briefly mentioned this, but you have to find iron deposits. Here is an iron vein. You have to, with the two balls, the two rocks in a compass, you have to figure out how to get that out. So you have to make tools to get that iron vein out. And then there's another one. Then you have to make a blast furnace to melt the ore. This would have been a highly, obviously ancient people did this, but it was with tons of experience, generation after generation after generation. Here's a more modern one from like the 15 or 1600s or something.
I would have had Layman and Lemuel doing that.
Yeah, they would do the hard work. By the way, I want to stop here and just say something. The apologists understand that having this be the normal size of what we consider an transoceanic ship doesn't work. They realize that a big ship has even more complexity. So they don't want to talk about a big ship because John Larson in the episode Nephi's Transoceanic Voyage knocks that out of the park, and he decimates the idea that this would have been a normal transoceanic ship like we all think about, because they know that that gets knocked down easily. So now they want it to be a small ship. And so that we've seen pictures of those and the ones that they've chased down. But there are problems with the small ship as well, carrying everyone, carrying the animals, carrying the supplies, carrying enough, whatever it is, all the things. And so you can come up with different ways to build ships, and maybe there's ways to build ships that don't require nails, but at least in the big ship, which would be the most reasonable thing to cross the ocean with. By the way, I'll say another thing. Pinpointing small ships that were island hopping ships and then saying, well, there's nothing stopping them from trying and God helped them and they made it. Nobody takes the tiniest of ships out into the ocean and makes it. It's just not what you do. So using it and going like, well, maybe like it could happen is a stretch. If it is a big ship, there's a problem with making nails. Again, mining and refining the ore, creating forge to heat the iron, precisely forming each nail, which requires expertise in metallurgy. So there's some old nails. These aren't super, super old, but these are kind of the old style of nails that you would find. Each of those has a very similar shape. There would be molds to make those in. So you have to get the lumber to make the charcoal, cutting down the trees, building charcoal pits, managing the production to ensure a constant supply of fuel. Again, these are people who have done this work in their family and in this system for centuries, generation after generation after generation. It is a complicated procedure. I mean, imagine again a Jewish family with no tools trying to build a ship. They talk about some of the Viking ships and all the skills that go into it. Each part of the ship has to be built right so that the ship doesn't collapse. John mentioned earlier, they would build the first one and sink, and build the second one and sink, and build the third one and sink. And each time this wood soaks up water, it swells, and you have to account for that. There is skill to every process of this. Here are other people building a giant ship. Now, this one's huge, but these guys have been doing this work for generation after generation for centuries. It's a skill set that they know what they're doing, and they have specialized tools to do it. There's that. There's an old one frame of a ship found. This is just complicated work. You have to have a dry dock if you're going to do a big ship. That's also a complicated thing. Here's a dry dock in an old photo. Here's an ancient dry dock. But again, they wouldn't have necessarily had access to something like this. So this is something that would have been built learning this trade again over centuries and generation after generation after generation.
I know if I were building that boat, I would finally, have spent several lifetimes studying, figuring out how to do this. And I would have built my boat, and then I would have said, okay, now I've got the built boat. Now, how the hell do I get it into the water?
Yeah, that another trick in and of itself, right? To do that.
You have to think about that from the very beginning.
In the live chat, I just posted the URL to Mormon Expression. It's one of the greatest podcast episodes involving Mormonism ever. Nephi's Transoceanic Voyage by Mormon Expression and John Larson. But the other thing you got making rope. Rope making is an intricate process. Harvesting fibrous plants or materials, processing the fibers through retting, drying, and spinning, weaving the fibers into strong, durable ropes. Here's an ancient papyrus fiber rope. Each one of those strands has to be woven and then woven together into a rope, and then each of those ropes have to be woven together into a large, thick rope, because this is going to take on a ton of stress. And so these hangs have a certain way. That's a video there. I won't play it, but it shows some of the rope making. Again, specialized tools and much more modern tools, but specialized tools for making rope that weaves the rope in and out of itself so that you end up with this twisted pieces that end up making a completed rope.
What are they making the rope out of?
Right. What is in Bountiful that they're making that out of? What fibrous plant?
Coconuts.
Is it a grass? Is it animal hair? Is it?
It's
when
coconut.
I said a mile of cordage, I meant a mile of complete cordage. But when you think about all the individual strands that make up ropes, Oh my goodness, it's copious amounts.
Yeah, God gave Nephi a revelation, and Nephi told Laman and Lemuel how to do it, and they just go off and make rope. It's no big deal. And the reality is it's uber complicated, and it's not something that could just be done like that. So there's that. There's another group. Again, you've got the sort of a loom there and sort of separating all the fibers. I mean, it's just, again, complicated stuff. There are specialized tools. Here is an old ancient rope making tool, and you would put each one of those. Again, you take all these strands, you make smaller ropes, you put it through the holes, and then you're twisting it as you're looming it, and you essentially then get your much bigger completed rope. Here's a guy working that process with a tool. I'm going to skip this because it goes into some of that. Making a sail, building a loom to weave the fabric, raising the sheep and shearing the wool and spinning the yarn and weaving large, sturdy pieces of fabric capable of withstanding oceanic winds and waves. You can't get it wrong. You get one shot at it. Even if God tells you how to do it, it can't be so weak that it falls apart. Otherwise, God's plugging all the holes, and now you've made so many allowances. So there's, again, complicated processes, intricate tools that have been built over lifetimes of adjustment and figuring out what works and what doesn't work. Ancient shipbuilding tools there. Sail material. We talked about the sheep. The ancient sail material is made from two different yarns spun from one primitive hairy breed of sheep. The warp yarn used the long hair spun tight with a Z twist, and the weft yarn was more softly twisted from the hair and short fiber. That in itself shows lots of knowledge and skill, being able to create different types of yarn for different tasks. It's not just one yarn that does all the tricks. Different types of yarn are needed. Provisions, ensuring sufficient food and water for the journey, estimating the duration of the voyage, provisioning accordingly, preserving food to prevent spoilage, calculating the weight and space requirements for food and water. You can't be 2 weeks shy on food. You have to have enough. Calculating the weight and space. Things to keep in mind. Those in charge of provisioning ships selected food that could last a long time. Flour, salted meats, raisins, dried beans, rice, hard cheeses, molasses, for example. To be able to serve fresh meat out at sea, ocean-going ships often brought livestock, pigs, chickens, goats, cows, sheep, that they could butcher along the way. It's estimated that more mariners died from scurvy, a disease caused by a diet lacking in vitamin C, than from storms, shipwrecks, battles, and all other diseases combined. Storage for the animals, the foods, and you need someone to cook or prepare it. This was an ancient record of how much food was needed. So this was the logistics of feeding hundreds of sailors. Again, you can divide this by 20 if you want, and say we have 10 people. But I think even the Book of Mormon would sort of indicate that it's a much larger group than that, 20 or 30 people maybe. And so you divide all that out, and it's the kind of supplies you need. So divide all of that by 20. And those are roughly the supplies you sort of need for a transoceanic voyage. Containers for supplies. We talked about the pots earlier. Creating barrels. That's also another skill set. Making the pots is another skill set. Ensuring the containers are waterproof and durable to protect the provisions from the elements. Also, that water is going to grow stagnant or turn bad pretty quickly if that barrel is dirty or if the pots are dirty. Everything has to be clean. You have to have things to clean them with. Quite a bit of skill that would go into something like that. There's homemade old like vintage boxes or crates to put stuff in, but even those take skills. Difficulty in tanning skins. Leather for various ship parts or clothing involves hunting and skinning animals. Processing the hides through labor-intensive tanning processes. Here's folks doing a more ancient way of sort of tanning hides. So there's that. Again, look at the tools. Intricate stuff. Health and sanitation. Other points. Only Nephi knows how to build the ship. No one else has the skill set. How long does it take to train people? We talked about that earlier. Where does Nephi get the tools to mine the ore? We talked about that. How much clean drinking water? How much food and food for the animals that are end up going to be your food? How many animals? Whatever direction they traveled. The Lehi voyage was almost surely the longest voyage across oceans recorded in history, perhaps as long as 17,000 miles. Does this Scripture Central video prove that it was possible?
Sorry, this is my question. This is the
Oh, yeah,
last
please go ahead.
question.
Sorry, all yours.
Well, go ahead. You read that, and please just make it posed to Dr. Lundwall. He's been quiet too long.
Dr. Lundwall, does this Scripture Central video prove that it was possible for a small family, unskilled, to have traveled from Jerusalem to present-day Oman on the east coast of Saudi Arabia, build a ship, and sail through the Indian Ocean and then across the Pacific Ocean to land in the Americas?
Well, after that list you just mentioned, Bill, all I can say is I would have gotten 1,000th of the way through the process before I had beaten all my compatriots to death with my bare hands.
Yeah.
And then picked the flesh out of my teeth with a brass plate.
Yeah.
That's how it would have ended for me. So Nephi is also a super saint. No, I mean, truly, it's a radical improbability. But all of it is, right? The brass plates, radical improbability. The gold plates, radical improbability. The boat, radical improbability. All of it.
And can I suggest then, as long as we're concluding, that the very fact that they made this video was because they were responding to what they perceive as a weak spot in the Book of Mormon, and to try and shore it up against people like us and like John Larson, I think especially and prominently, have poked in the Nephi building a ship story. So they know it's a weak spot. They create a video which doesn't answer the question. It doesn't give any examples of any Jewish people even going on the water, actually, much less building a boat and doing so. And all they're doing is looking at other groups, other traditions who did remarkable things with boats, and then saying, well, no, they don't say it. That's the beauty of it. They don't say, therefore, Jesus could have done it too. Jesus, well, he would have walked across the water. Nephi had to build a boat. They're saying Nephi could have done it too. They don't say that. And that's the beauty of this. So they're trying to respond to it by bringing it up as an issue. Then they go through the rest of their entire show without ever really addressing that issue again, and allowing the audience to take this information and apply it to Nephi and answer their own question.
Seems like every episode of this series is that way, though. I mean, it's all, it's the greatness of the evidence, and I haven't seen one scrap of evidence. Innuendo, implication, equivocation, with a backdrop of traveling around the world and some experts, none of which are actually talking about the archaeology, anthropology, linguistics, and DNA of the New World.
Except for the chickens.
Right. So it's, the point isn't proof. The point is inoculation.
Okay. And by that, I take it you mean that the point is to put out something that at least on its face appears to address the issue, so you don't have to look any further or worry yourself about it anymore.
Exactly.
Okay. Bill, do you have anything? Is there anything else left in the slides? We did get to the end of the slides, right? I know we're at 2:08, and we usually take a few phone calls at the end of the show.
Yep. And I've got 2 calls in the queue. Number, folks, there's one more line open, 662-667-6667. And so I'll go to the first phone call if you guys don't have anything else.
I think we should take some calls.
Let's do it. And then we'll wrap up and send everybody on their way. So first person is, I think, Wayne. Wayne, is that you? Is that your name?
Yes, it's me. Yes. I'm here. And I just wanted to, when you talked about the impossibility or difficulty of smelting iron and getting it, for a long time, people were getting iron from river sands, from bogs. So to say that you got to go up and mine the ore is not necessarily what people were doing back then. And then to get the temperature up to melting, that was a technology that really wasn't available until about the 1400s. In Europe, the Chinese and Indians were doing it a lot sooner than that. The main thing on smelting, which most people get wrong, is that you got to heat the ore up. And you take a look at something like lava, you take a rock, heat it up to where it melts, and you're not going to break it down into components. You've got to go in and chemically alter it during the smelting process, which is a little bit more difficult, but it's something that can be done. When you say, can you smelt iron with 2 rocks and some skins? Yes, people were doing that a long time ago. So the smelting of the iron, the ore, really isn't that difficult. So I just wanted to point that out, that that isn't something, a deal killer that, people couldn't have done. The technology was there. And that's just one thing I want to point out, is that, yeah, it's possible. Did it happen? Absolutely not. There's no proof that it was done. But when you come up and say, it was impossible to build the boat, I don't think that's really a valid argument.
You find all of those components to add up to it being possible to build the boat.
It's possible to build the boat. I mean, the Polynesians were able to populate the Pacific without, with using Stone Age tools.
Well, right, but here,
so it is possible. Did it happen? Did it happen? Absolutely not.
Okay, so here's my question for you, Wayne. Because it sounds like you have. Wayne, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay, great. Sometimes we've been having trouble with technology. You seem to be a person who has some knowledge about these kinds of things. So I wanted to ask your opinion. In your opinion, what is the biggest signal in the Nephi built a boat story that makes it so that you conclude that it absolutely didn't happen?
I mean, there's so many that.
Give me your top.
I mean, just one of the things would be the sails. The Viking, the thing that limited the Viking fleet was actually the sail building rather than the boat building. It's that difficult to build sails consistently. Where you are, getting the skills across. Is it possible? Yes, it is. There's no proof that anybody sailed that late, to get to the Americans populated. I mean, there's more proof that says it didn't happen. But was the technology there? Yeah, the technology was there.
Well, look, I'm not interested in what is possible. I'm interested in what is highly probable. And what has to happen here is a Jewish family from Jerusalem has to learn how to smelt, make tools. The text tells us this. Build boats, ropes, pottery, sails. So yeah, people were doing all of that, but that doesn't mean Nephi was doing any of that. So I think that was the point we were trying to make.
Right. And I wanted to say, we're not arguing that Nephi didn't exist.
But this is more than that. He didn't
Nephi
exist,
didn't.
Therefore, he couldn't have done anything. This is even if he existed as a real Jewish person,
he didn't.
With the background that the Book of Mormon gives it, that he still
right.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting to me, Wayne, that
he didn't exist.
Yeah, it's interesting to me, Wayne, that you come down with your background and your perspective on sales being the big neon sign saying, no way could he have done this.
That would have been a very difficult thing.
Yeah,
for them to do. That it would have been the sales where you were, constructing the ship. I mean, there's a lot more to it. So if you're coming out and wanting to say the Book of Mormon is false because they couldn't have built a ship. Yeah, I mean, the technology was there. And you can always say, well, God would have taught them, it's not impossible, they would have picked up skills. That's not it. I mean, there's so many other things that on this, if they want to say, well, the technology is there. Yeah, I mean, the technology is there. The technology was there to write, have gold plates. The gold plates didn't exist.
Right. And when you say the technology was there,
the-
Wayne, what I understand you saying, okay, because I think we're on the same
Right.
page on this. What I hear you saying, that technology was there. Well, it was there someplace in the world among some group of seafaring people who
Right.
have spent generations developing the abilities and the tools and the skills necessary to do this, right? That's what I understand you saying.
The technology, the technology of the day was there to do it. They just didn't, they didn't exist. They didn't do it. They didn't make the boat. But yeah, that's what I'm saying is that the technology that was there to do it, but they didn't do it because they didn't exist.
Yeah. You see, that's where you're losing me, because that's where I think we're diverging. Because what I'm saying is, even if Nephi did exist, the Jews did not have this technology, and they could not have used it. And a group of 5 or 10 or 20 people who've left Jerusalem and fled by night would not have had this technology and could not have developed it in their own lifetimes. That's what I'm sensing. But do you disagree with
Right.
that, Wayne? Or are we
Right,
on the same
but
page on
then-
that too?
Well, no, I don't think that. I think that's they would. There's a lot of skills that go on to it, and the group probably didn't have it.
Yeah.
If you're looking at, the counter argument is God would have showed them.
But that
and you
works.
can't-
That
when
works
you
for
have
high
that, you-
Kolob too, right? That works for a spaceship and going to Kolob.
Right. That
If
works.
once God,
That right.
what did
right,
the Greeks
that
call that? What did the Greeks call
Right.
it?
It works.
Do ex machina, right? The do ex machina.
Deus ex machina.
Yeah,
The
it's all
God in the
Greek to me.
machine.
Have you ever heard of that, Wayne? The do ex machina,
Right.
and the idea why it's called the do
Not
ex
that,
machina.
but the general concept.
Yeah, it's the machine of God, and the
Yeah.
idea,
It,
I recall from being a theater major and a dance major, was that at the end of some Greek tragedies, when the author had managed to get themselves into a real pickle, okay, where they can't quite get themselves out of the pickle that they've written themselves into, what happens is God descends in his chariot. Zeus descends in his chariot from ropes and pulleys from the ceiling,
Right.
not a real ceiling. He comes down, and then he waves his magic lightning bolt, and everything goes back to the way it should be. In other words, we have God introduced into a plot to get the characters, actually the author, out of the predicament
Right.
that the author got them in. And even though we don't use do ex machina too much anymore, specifically, it is very, very common. We have a form of that everybody knows about, that you get somebody into a predicament that's so bad, there's no way they can get out of it, and they wake up and it was all a dream. So that's the modern version of the do ex machina. As soon as you put God into the picture, anything goes. Yeah.
Wayne, I'm gonna let you go, but I
Right.
want to ask you in regards to the veins of ore. You said that it wouldn't be necessary to find veins of ore in the mountains. They could have been found where, like in the riverbeds, like sort of like panning for gold kind of thing.
Riverbeds, yeah.
Man, that seems
Yeah,
like
you can, yeah.
Yeah, that would seems like you wouldn't find enough fast
No,
enough.
that is a very realistic thing on what happened. The early iron cultures got bog iron from swamps.
I think the Book of Mormon text tells us that Nephi goes into the mountains to smelt the ore.
He goes in the mountains to smelt the ore. Yeah, I mean, that's what I'm saying is, if you're looking for things of saying, well, you could, it would have been too difficult to paint the iron. Ancient peoples were getting river sands. I mean, that's really a thing that they did, and converting that into iron. So it's not totally impossible to do it that way. So, again, it's, yes, is there a way for them to get iron from river sands? Yes, the ancient people did it all the time. Ancient people got iron bog all the time. That's where the early iron came from. So that those are things when I say, was the technology there? Yes. Did they do it? No. So to say simply that the technology at the time didn't exist, yes, it did.
Okay, I'll let you go. We'll respond a little bit to that, and we'll move on to the next call. Thank you, my friend.
We'll move on to the next call. Thanks for calling.
Okay, thanks.
I think that at least I've been trying, and I think all of us been trying to make clear that no, we are talking about technology all over the place, just in the wrong places among the wrong people, and not among the Jews, and certainly not among this small group of Jewish people that's represented in the Book of Mormon. So I think more than anything, we're on the same page there. Who's the next call, Bill?
I'm just curious how many swamps there were in Bountiful. I don't think there was, like, again, I hear what he's saying, but that also seems like a really big stretch. Okay.
I think he's just talking about technology in general, any place in the world.
Yeah, but we're held to the geography and the way in which the Book of Mormon tells the story. And so now we're limited to a sort of box of ideas that are in print that Nephi says this is the way it happened.
Well, right. This is the whole methodology. All the technology was there. I don't think we ever contradicted that. We're just saying that family, that group, starting from scratch, having to do all of that is the technology was there to build the Deus Ex Machina. But the fact that it shows up is the problem.
All right, let me unmute that. This might be Keenan. Is that the name, my friend?
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead,
Hey,
my friend.
guys.
You're on Mormonism Alive.
Keenan, tell us about finding iron in bogs.
Yeah. Yeah, I wanted to talk extensively about bog iron if you guys have about 25 minutes.
Go ahead, my friend.
No, it just occurred to me that the real problem with this story is more epistemological than it is logistical. And what I mean by that is that the Book of Mormon was coming forward in a time post-Enlightenment when God's role in the world was shifting from direct intervention in human affairs to intervening by empowering or enabling other people to do superhuman things that were still naturalistic. And so what I see in this story is not unlike Joseph Smith's translation or claim to translate the Book of Mormon in 60 days, which is a naturalistic process, as he describes it, but done maybe powered. God's role in that was to empower him to do something superhuman. So what I see in the boat building story is actually an 18th century post-Enlightenment story where Joseph Smith is describing something, giving vague but naturalistic details that people in his day could understand as a more naturalistic story, but saying that Nephi was, incredibly fast and incredibly smart and incredibly good at learning these skills, using these tools, building this boat in an unreasonably fast or quick amount of time. So for me, if this story was truly a story that was recorded in the 600 BC, I would expect maybe a story about angels carrying a vessel across the waters, or God parting the oceans to allow them to walk their way, across the Atlantic or the Pacific. Wait, that's the Atlantic. Sorry.
There would have been more direct intervention.
Yeah, that was kind of my thought. Is that epistemologically, the way people thought about God's role in the world 600 BC is very different from the way people were thinking about it post-Enlightenment and even today, where it's more about empowering people to do superhuman things. But if you look at the way Joseph Smith created the Book of Mormon, these are thoughts that he had been ruminating on, possibly writing things down, rehearsing stories for years. But the faith, the faithful story is that he was uneducated and was given superhuman abilities by God to do a naturalistic task, sitting there transcribing, and translating a record, but doing it in a superhuman way through God's power. So I think that, to me, it's very much a story from his time, not an ancient story, obviously.
Keenan, I will tell you that I looked up, because as Wayne brought up about the river sand and the iron, I looked that up. Apparently that's really a thing. I never heard of that before. But I can tell from Dr. Lundwall's face that your comment has really made the wheels start turning. I think he has something to say about this.
Yeah. No, it's an excellent observation. Every verse in the Book of Mormon is epistemologically out of place. So the entire text is post-Reformation, and it belongs in a thought world that's completely anachronistic to 600 BCE or the Jaredites or any of the time frame of the Book of Mormon. So you're right. If we were to get an actual narrative in that time frame from those people from Jerusalem, we wouldn't have anything like we have in the Book of Mormon. It would be far more mythological, dealing with direct intervention. That's a very good point. And so, yeah, no, it's a completely different thought world. So, amen.
Wow, if you can get an
Nephi is
amen
kind of
from
like
Dr. Lundwall.
Yeah, I think it.
Go ahead.
Oh yeah, I think it reveals something about an anxiety that a lot of apologists and believers have, which I empathize with and understand. But it's an anxiety to find naturalistic explanations so they can kind of meet that criteria of believability that we all live in post-enlightenment, which is to say, oh, this, I can see someone doing this. This is naturalistic. I can see myself doing this, rather than saying this was magic, or, you know, this was a talking animal, or all these kind of wilder, more mythical, magical ideas are difficult for people to wrestle with. So there's this obsession to say, well, was this plausible? Could they have done this with or? When the reality is, even Nephi, had he existed at his time, would not be concerned with these questions. Like, these would not be these would not be obstacles to faith to people in his day. He would just say, yeah, you know, God told me to build a boat, and he's going to take care of it. Angels or something, you know what I mean? Like, so I think it's an anxiety that a lot of believers still hold on to and try to work through, but really has no relationship to how Nephi and Lehi and his family would have believed and reasoned through these things. So yeah, anyway, it's interesting to kind of think about.
It is interesting. I think that same idea finds reflection in the attempt by some Christians to explain miraculous occurrences described in the Bible in scientific terms.
Right. Yeah, I think I almost feel like to bring in some Mormon theology. I think I can't remember which apostle or prophet said this, but it's missing the mark. I think it kind of detracts from people's the simple belief and faith, and the good things that I think the church can provide for people, I think are there, but there's so much of this epistemological anxiety that people are wrestling with, that they have to figure out how they can explain these things. And there is no there's no 60-day translation, and there's no 1 year boat building by a Jewish family in the Middle East, 600 BC. Those things don't work. So you're never going to affirm your faith by looking for those explanations. Anyways, I'll hop off. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Keenan, thanks a lot for your comments.
And then I think the last call might be Barry Richens.
Barry.
Anyways,
Barry, how are
Thank
you?
guys.
If you can turn off
Hey,
the
Barry.
sound in the background, that'd be great. But you're on, my friend. What's on your mind?
The sound that I had was, I was listening to you. Okay. Hey, Bill, this is Barry.
Yeah.
And as you know, I am a retired literature teacher. And as I would, people would say how wonderful the Book of Mormon was as literature. And I wanted to talk just a minute about the Book of Mormon, then go back to reality. When I read novels, I have to be willing to suspend disbelief. And so when I read, turn off the, yeah, when I read
the Book of Mormon or the Bible.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Anyway, when I would have to suspend. People would say, "Isn't the Book of Mormon a wonderful piece of literature?" And I thought, not if you want to think of it as a spiritual book or a book of truth. It's not a good book. And I started thinking about the ship stories, like the Jaredites. And one of the things I thought about the ships, and I've shared this idea with others sometimes, but if the Jaredites built a barge, it was only going to be as long as a tree. Remember, that's what it said. And they had to build it airtight, and they had air hole on the top and air hole on the bottom. And if I'm not mistaken, I think for their voyage was 360 day long, and they had to have enough fodder to feed a cow or a horse, and that would be about 3,000 pounds of fodder, not to include the water. So you had to put people and livestock and bees in that little space. And they had the air hole on the top and on the bottom because the ship would turn over in the waves. One turn, and all of those livestock and animals and people, plus all of the urine and the manure or the bullshit, all that stuff on the floor, they would have been broken up, maybe kicked by livestock and killed and stung to death by the bees. They probably wouldn't have lived 1 week at sea. Then when I went over to the Nephites, I started watching a program that someone put on about building a Viking ship. And they said that to build that Viking ship, it took 60,000 man hours to put it together. And in Viking times, they had built a shipbuilding culture. And another thing that someone said about sails, when I think of there on the tip of Oman, and I'm wondering where they found 200 sheep to shear to make a sail, because that's how many sheep they had to shear to make that Viking. Then I'm wondering where they got the hemp or the other material to make the roping. And then you have to ask, what do they store the water in? Is it clay? Well, it's going to be heavy and it's going to be hard. Is it animal skin? That can't be very big. And so when you think of that, you have to realize that you have to suspend belief or disbelief to understand or try to make that work. And so when I read all of that stuff as a literature teacher, I would ask my students, if I'd had them in that, could this have happened? Would this have happened? Is it possible? And they could say, well, if with God helping, they could. But think about it. God didn't melt the ore for them. God didn't go dig the ore for them. He didn't build the hammers for them. They had to do it all by itself. So it wasn't a miraculous story at that time. It was a story of real people trying to do real things, but in an area that it couldn't have happened. So that's all I wanted to share, was just a little bit about some of my own experience in trying to be an expert on the Book of Mormon. And I recognize I'm talking too fast and I'm too excited to be on here, but I'm grateful you let me on, guys.
Well, you're doing great, Barry. And by the way, the Jaredites, you'll be glad to know, it was easier for them to make the voyage because it wasn't 360 days. As it turns out, it was 344.
Oh, shit. I'm so sorry.
It's right there.
And another thing I thought about, the reason they called the British limeys is because if you went to sea very long, you needed vitamin C. I think it was berry that they would get. And without something like with a lot of vitamin C in it, the people would get sick. So can you imagine all of Lehi's children and babies getting sick?
Oh,
and also then you have to think about food and cover for, and evidently they had to, for that ship to have worked, unlike the Hawaiian ships, for that ship to work, they would have had a lower hold. And then they couldn't, how do you keep all the water out? And how do you keep things dry? And so that's why, so if anybody would ask me, you got to ask, is it possible? And of course, it isn't possible humanly. Even when we were talking about the Phoenicians had at least 800 or 900 years of a shipbuilding industry before they ever sent ships out to sea. And there was a time in the Mediterranean when even the Phoenicians would not go across the water. They would always try to coastal sail. And in the wintertime, they withheld all shipping because even their boats couldn't stand up to the roughness of the seas. But the Phoenicians and Romans were fighting with each other, and the Romans finally beat them. And so the Romans took out the tin route, and they went out through the routes of Gibraltar, and they sailed up through Biscayne and past France and over to Cornwall. And they got tin there because tin was an important material to build bronze. And so they were able to go out into the Atlantic, but they didn't go way far from the shore.
Mm-hmm.
Their boats couldn't take it. So anyway, those are just little tidbits that I've...
Barry, I'm still caught up on this image of the divine shit tumbler, and I'm wondering if a glowing rock would help that.
Well, a glowing rock would just, you could see the color of it, and you say, "Oh shit, Dom," you have.
And
she said, "That's what it is. Close your mouth, you little brat. Don't swallow that."
You have some light so you can see what not.
It was. Yeah, so you have to look at things and see, could it have happened? It's like, what is it when the guy says, well, there's about 1 in a million chance. And so what is it, Dumb and Dumber? He said, you mean there's still a chance? And that's what we're going against. And so any book that would be valuable to me would be a book that's teaching me history. It would be one in which I do not have to be willing to suspend disbelief.
It's a great expression you bring up, Barry, and I think that by this point, Mormons have become experts at suspending disbelief.
Oh, shit. Well, I was. Hey, listen, when I got on my mission, I went to Mexico City to summer school before my mission, and I was told that the reason the Spanish were so successful is they had steel and horses. 6 months later, I'm home back to my hometown, and they call me back on a mission to Mexico. They hand me a Book of Mormon. I read it for the first time. What do I read about? Horses and steel. What do? I'm there to be on a mission. I gave away my academic belief, put it up on that shelf, and decided to be a Mormon. I suspended belief until I was about 75 when I could no longer do it. My cognitive dissonance got so bad that I said, to hell with it. Whatever happens to me, I'm leaving. And that's how it happened.
I would take your idea and extend it just a little bit further, Barry, and say that the point at which a Mormon generally ends up not being a Mormon any longer is at the point that they can no longer suspend the disbelief.
Well, that's what cognitive dissonance is. You're trying to carry two ideas at the same time. And when they get so strong that they're fighting against each other, it attacks you mentally. Yeah. And it attacks your integrity, your self-integrity. No one can see it. Only you can feel it. But finally you say, I can't live with this anymore. When I left my mother, talk about Freudian, when I left, my wife said to me, Barry, how could you give up your covenant that you made in the temple? And I said, when I could no longer believe in a God, I no longer had anybody to keep that covenant with. And my disbelief died of 1,000 doubts.
And your wife said, Barry, what about me?
That's exactly right. And that's the shits, my friend. That's hell.
I know women. I've been
because I love her very much. Oh yeah, I followed your career. I sometimes cringe and hurt for you, you little brat.
It's
remarkable. But I do, because yeah. But I love my wife so much, and yet we still can't. There's certain things we cannot talk about.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been out of the church for 8 years.
Yeah. Well, Barry, you're a great guy. I'm so thankful that you called into the show, and I'm glad we got your ideas about suspended disbelief. I think that was very valuable.
Yeah.
Would you please tell your wife that
Yeah, I thought it would be.
Would you please tell your wife that Radio Free Mormon says hi?
Yeah, she's an invalid. She spends all.
I didn't drop that. He just went mute all of a sudden.
Are you
Cheers.
still there?
There he is.
Well,
Okay.
yeah. Anyway, thanks a lot, you guys. And Bill,
yes,
I
sir.
want you to know that I love Mormonism After Dark.
Good.
Well, I hope you'll be there with us.
And I've
this
had a lot of
Friday at
fun.
8. I hope you'll be there, Barry, this Friday
I'll
at
be
8
there.
o'clock p.m. Your wife is invited too, so you could do something together, have a little date night, you know?
I doubt she would like it.
Thank you, Barry.
Give her
Have
a
a great
chance.
day.
She'll like it, believe me.
Hey, guys, don't go home all in the same car because we'd lose the brain trust of the world if you were in an accident. So be
Well, my
careful,
problem
man.
is that in order to get home, I have to go outside and build a car.
Have a great night, Barry.
All right, take care, you guys.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Bye-bye, Barry. And I've got about as much chance of building a car as Nephi had of building a boat. Okay, so having brought this all back around, hey, Dr. Lundwall, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Thanks so much for your erudition and all of your insights. We really appreciate it. Bill, thanks for everything in your slides and everything you brought to the show. Thank you, all our listeners. Thank you so much for watching. Please hit like, please hit subscribe. And thank you so much for your donations. Those of you who have donated and gone the extra mile, your donations are keeping us coming to you on a weekly basis of Mormonism Live. It's episode 196. 4 more episodes. We're at the big 200. And I can't believe it's been almost 200 episodes now. By the way, every freaking week, not missing one, and no reruns. Always something different here on Mormonism Live. Thanks for joining us. Please join us next week at Mormonism Live, Wednesdays at 6:20 p.m. Mountain Time. And please join us this Friday for Mormonism After Dark at 8 o'clock p.m. Mountain Time. I'll be wearing my tux. You wear yours too. We'll see you then. Thanks for watching. Good night, everybody.
Mormonism Live. Better than touching your own little factory.